The observation deck of the Galactic Survey Station Meridian hung in the void like a steel eye watching the forgotten corners of explored space. Through the panoramic viewport, the planet Kithara 9 rotated slowly, its surface a patchwork of rust-colored deserts and the skeletal remains of cities that predated most known civilizations. To the Varshreen officers manning the station, it was just another dead world on the edge of charted territory, interesting only to archaeologists and fools. Commander Velsharik of the Varshreen Stellar Corps stood with his forearms crossed behind his broad, chitinous back, his compound eyes reflecting the amber glow of the planet below. His species had dominated this sector for 3,000 years, their technological prowess unmatched, their military might unchallenged. The humans, those strange bipedal mammals who had stumbled into galactic society barely 2 centuries ago, were little more than curiosities, adequate laborers, occasionally clever engineers, but ultimately insignificant in the grand tapestry of galactic civilization. "Commander," chirped junior analyst Priltak, her antennae twitching with what Velsharik recognized as nervousness, "the automated reconnaissance drone has completed its survey pattern of the Kethara ruins. Sector 7 Alpha." Velsharik's mandibles clicked dismissively. "Sector 7 Alpha, the human expedition zone." He turned from the viewport, his tone carrying the weight of old irritation. 5 years of silence. The Council declared them lost 32 months ago. Why are we still wasting drone time on that sector? Protocol, Commander. Final sweep before the demolition authorization is processed. Priltak's claws danced across her control interface, her young eyes still holding traces of sympathy that experience would soon burn away. "The human delegation has been requesting one last search before they sign the salvage rights over to the Korthan Mining Consortium." "Sentiment," Velsharik muttered. "Humans cling to their dead like Zithrak beetles to rotting flesh." He moved toward the central command station, where holographic displays projected star charts and resource assessments. The expedition was poorly planned from the start. 7 humans, minimal supplies, descending into ruins that even the Ketharan ascendancy abandoned 10,000 years ago. Arrogance wrapped in scientific curiosity. The Kethara ruins had been classified as a Level 9 archaeological site. Dangerous, unstable, and strictly regulated. The human research team had obtained special dispensation from the Galactic Council 5 years ago, arguing that their unique neurological structure might interface with Ketharan technology in ways other species could not. The Council had granted permission mostly to silence the persistent human ambassador, expecting nothing significant to come of it. And nothing had, until the expedition vanished. "Commander," Priltak's voice had changed. The nervousness was gone, replaced by something Velsharik couldn't immediately identify. Confusion? No. Disbelief. "Commander, you need to see this." Velsharik approached her station with measured steps, his warrior instincts prickling. In 30 years of military and survey service, he had learned to recognize when the universe was about to deliver an unwelcome surprise. "What is it?" The junior analyst gestured to her holographic display, where the drone's sensor readouts painted abstract patterns in blue and green light. Biosignatures. Multiple. Deep in Sector 7 Alpha, approximately 2,000 meters below the primary excavation site, the commander's compound eyes focused on the data stream. Clarify, biosignatures could be native fauna, bacterial colonies, sensor echoes. Human biosignatures, Commander. Priltak's antennae were now rigid with certainty. 7 distinct readings. The genetic markers matched the archived profiles of the lost expedition team. Silence fell across the observation deck like a physical weight. The other officers and analysts turned from their stations, their various forms of alien anatomy, expressing the universal language of shock. One of the Korean technicians, a being resembling a floating jellyfish, pulsed with violet bioluminescence, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. Velsharik's mandibles worked soundlessly for a moment before he found his voice. "That's impossible. 5 years without resupply, without communication, trapped in ruins with no viable exit route. The structural assessments showed that entire sections collapsed 3 years ago after seismic activity. Even if they survived the initial descent, they would have succumbed to starvation, dehydration, equipment failure. The readings are definitive, Commander." Priltak expanded the hologram, and the 7 bright points of human life signature pulsed in the center of the display, clustered together in what the sensors identified as a large chamber deep within the ruins. All 7 original team members, Vital signs are stable. They're alive. Commander Velsharek felt something he had not experienced in decades. Genuine surprise. He had seen many things in his years of service. Stellar anomalies, first contacts with hostile species, the birth of new stars and the death of old ones. But this defied rational explanation. Humans were fragile creatures, dependent on constant resource replenishment, vulnerable to 1,000 environmental hazards. Their survival in the Kethara ruins for 5 years was beyond improbable. It was impossible, and yet the data did not lie. "Initiate priority communication with Galactic Council Survey Division," Velsharek commanded, his voice hardening into the clipped precision of military authority. "And contact the human diplomatic mission on Station Terminus. Inform them that their missing expedition has been located. Alive." "Commander," interjected Senior Analyst Morthkal, a Hrax whose grey, stone-like skin seemed even more grave than usual, "should we not first verify the readings? Send additional drones? The Kethara ruins are known for technological artifacts that can produce false sensor data. The Ascendancy was rumored to have developed sophisticated defense systems." "I am aware of the rumors, Analyst." Velsharek's tone cut through the air like a blade. "But if there is even a possibility that those humans are alive, protocol demands immediate action. The Council will not tolerate delays if survivors are confirmed, and we failed to respond with appropriate urgency." What Velsharek did not say aloud, what he barely acknowledged even to himself, was the uncomfortable political reality. The human species, for all their relative weakness and newcomer status, had proven annoyingly persistent in galactic affairs. They had advocates among the older races, trading partners, cultural exchanges. If 7 humans had somehow survived against impossible odds and the Galactic Survey Corps was perceived as having abandoned them, the diplomatic fallout would be significant. Better to act decisively now and discover a sensor error than to hesitate and confirm the prejudice that the galactic establishment did not value human life. "Deploy a manned rescue mission," Velsharek ordered. "Full survey team, medical support, structural engineers. I want redundant sensor arrays and direct visual confirmation. If those humans are truly alive down there, I want to know how, and I want to know what they found." The observation deck erupted into controlled chaos as officers moved to execute the commander's orders. Communication channels opened, resources were allocated, personnel were summoned from rest shifts. Through it all, Velsharek stood before the holographic display, staring at those 7 pulsing points of light in the darkness below. 7 humans, alive, after 5 years of silence. His instincts, honed by decades of command, whispered that this was no simple survival story. The Kethara ruins held secrets that had remained buried for 10 millennia. If the humans had not just survived, but had found something in those depths, something that had kept them alive when they should have died, then the implications stretched far beyond a simple rescue operation. The Ketharan Ascendancy had been one of the ancient civilizations, races so advanced that even the modern Galactic Council understood only fragments of their technology and philosophy. They had built wonders across dozens of star systems before vanishing into legend, leaving behind only ruins, enigmatic artifacts, and warnings inscribed in languages that defied translation. One phrase had been translated, repeated in inscriptions across multiple Ketharan sites. "Only the ones who remember will awaken what sleeps." Velsharek had always dismissed it as mystical nonsense, the kind of pompous prophecy that dead civilizations seemed fond of carving into their monuments. But now, staring at those biosignatures, he wondered if the humans had somehow proven the prophecy right. On the human diplomatic station, 3 star systems away, Ambassador Elena Vasquez received the message in the middle of her 3rd cup of coffee and 5th hour of reviewing trade agreements. The automated translation system delivered Commander Velsharek's words in flat, emotionless English. "Human expedition located. All 7 members alive. Rescue operation in progress." Elena's coffee cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor of her office. She had attended the memorial service 2 years ago. She had signed the death certificates. She had personally contacted the families of Dr. Marcus Webb, expedition leader, Dr. Sarah Chen, xenoarchaeologist, Lieutenant James Morrison, security officer, Dr. Raj Patel, engineer, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, linguist, Maria Santos, single mother and medical officer, and little Sophie Santos, Maria's 8-year-old daughter, who had been granted special permission to accompany the expedition as part of a controversial family integration research program. Sophie would be 13 now, if she was truly alive, if this wasn't some cruel error or political manipulation. Elena's hands trembled as she activated the emergency comm line to Earth's Interstellar Affairs Council. "This is Ambassador Vasquez, Priority Alpha. I need immediate authorization for travel to Kithara 9 and full diplomatic oversight of the rescue operation. Our people are alive. After 5 years, our people are alive." The voice on the other end of the line was equally stunned. "Ambassador, are you certain? The data could be—" "I don't care if it's a 0.01% chance," Elena interrupted, her voice cracking with emotion she no longer tried to conceal. "If there's any possibility that those 7 souls survived, I will be there when they come out of that darkness. I will not let them face the Galactic Council alone, not after what they've endured, not after we gave up on them." Authorization came through in less than 10 minutes, a record for the usually bureaucratic Earth government. Within 2 hours, Elena was aboard a fast courier ship, hurtling toward Kithara 9 at maximum velocity, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. How had they survived? What had they found in those ruins? And most troubling of all, if they had been alive all this time, why had they never sent a signal? Why had they remained silent in the darkness while the galaxy mourned them as dead? The rescue mission launched from Station Meridian 6 hours after the drone's discovery. Commander Velsharek led the operation personally, commanding a team of 12 specialists from 5 different species. They descended toward Kithara 9 in a heavy transport shuttle, its reinforced hull designed to withstand the structural instabilities of the ancient ruins. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, cutting through layers of rust-colored clouds, Velsharek reviewed the original expedition files on his tactical display. The leader, Dr. Marcus Webb, had been a decorated xenoarchaeologist with 17 years of field experience. A veteran of a dozen expeditions, respected but never celebrated, his theories about human neurological compatibility with Ketharan technology had been dismissed by the academic establishment as fringe science. The Kithara 9 expedition had been his last chance to prove his controversial ideas before mandatory retirement. The file included a final interview conducted before the expedition's descent. Dr. Webb's weathered face filled the screen, his grey beard and tired eyes marking him as someone the galaxy had overlooked one too many times. But his voice carried conviction. "We're not treasure hunters or glory seekers. We believe the Kitharans left something behind, something meant to be found by a species that thinks the way we do, that feels the way we do. If we're right, this changes everything. If we're wrong, well, at least we'll have tried." They had been wrong, Velsharek had assumed. Wrong and dead and forgotten by all but the bureaucrats who needed to close the file. Except they weren't dead. The shuttle touched down at the original expedition base camp, now half buried by 5 years of dust storms and geological shifts. The automated systems had long since failed, leaving only skeletal frameworks of habitat modules and dead communication arrays. The entrance to the ruins yawned before them, a massive archway carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "All teams, final equipment check," Velsharek commanded, his voice transmitted through the communication network linking every member of the rescue party. "We descend in formation. Maintain constant visual contact. The ruins are structurally unstable and potentially hostile to technology. If you experience any equipment malfunctions or sensory anomalies, report immediately." The descent began. They moved through corridors that had not known footsteps for 10,000 years, at least not until 7 desperate humans had ventured into the darkness 5 years ago. The architecture was simultaneously beautiful and unsettling. Walls that curved in geometries that hurt to perceive, ceilings that seemed to shift perspective when viewed from different angles, floors inscribed with symbols that seemed to writhe in the light of their portable illumination systems. "Commander," reported Dr. Silthran, the team's archaeological specialist, "these inscriptions, they're changing. I've been recording them, and the symbols are different each time I look at the same section. That should be impossible." "Everything about this place is impossible," muttered Lieutenant Kavar, the security chief, a Hrax warrior whose species prided itself on fearlessness, "which is precisely why I recommend we proceed with extreme caution." They descended deeper. 200 meters, 500, 1,000. The biosignatures grew stronger, confirming that the humans were indeed below, in the deepest accessible section of the ruins. But as they drew closer, New data began flooding the sensors, energy readings that defied classification, electromagnetic patterns that resembled no known technology, and something else, something the sensors couldn't properly quantify. The ruins were active, not just structurally stable but functioning, powered by sources that should have been exhausted millennia ago. "This is wrong," Velsharik said quietly, speaking more to himself than his team. "The Catharans have been extinct for 10,000 years. Their technology should be dead. Even with residual power sources, 5 millennia is the maximum documented duration for—" "Commander!" The shout came from the advanced scout, a Quarian whose sensory capabilities exceeded any mechanical scanner. "I have visual contact with the chamber. You need to see this." The rescue team emerged into a vast chamber that should not have existed in any rational universe. The space was enormous, easily 500 meters across and half that in height, carved from the living rock of the planet's crust. But it was not dark. It was not dead. The chamber glowed. Panels in the walls pulsed with soft blue luminescence, creating patterns that seemed almost like breathing. The air was warm, filtered through systems that hummed with quiet purpose. And at the center of the chamber, arranged around what appeared to be a crystalline structure the size of a small building, were 7 humans. They were not cowering. They were not starving. They were not desperate. They were alive, truly, impossibly alive, and they had been waiting. Dr. Marcus Webb stood at the forefront, his gray beard now longer, his clothes worn but clean, his posture relaxed. Beside him stood Maria Santos, the medical officer, her arm around her daughter Sophie, who had indeed grown from an 8-year-old child into a young teenager. The others gathered around them: Sarah Chen, James Morrison, Raj Patel, Yuki Tanaka, all 7 expedition members, whole and healthy, and behind them, integrated into the walls of the chamber, towering constructs of crystalline technology pulsed with light that seemed to respond to the humans' presence. Machines, guardians, something ancient and powerful that had been sleeping for 10,000 years, until 7 humans had awakened it. Dr. Webb smiled, a tired, knowing smile that held no surprise at the rescue team's arrival. He stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice echoed in the vast chamber with quiet dignity. "Commander Velsharik, I presume. Thank you for finally coming. We've been expecting you." He gestured to the glowing, crystalline structures around them. "We have so much to show you. So much to explain. The Catharans didn't abandon these ruins, Commander. They left them. For us. For humanity." Velsharik's mandibles opened and closed soundlessly. His compound eyes took in the impossible scene. 7 humans, who should have been dead, surrounded by technology that should have been dormant, standing in a chamber that radiated power and purpose. And in that moment, Commander Velsharik understood with crystalline clarity that the galaxy was about to change in ways none of them were prepared for. The age of human insignificance had just ended. In the darkness of Kithara's ruins, something ancient had awakened, and it had chosen humanity. The silence in the chamber stretched like elastic pulled too far, ready to snap. Commander Velsharik stood frozen at the entrance to the vast space, his tactical mind struggling to process what his compound eyes were witnessing. Behind him, the rescue team had stopped mid-stride, weapons half raised, medical kits unopened, their various forms of alien physiology united in a single expression: absolute bewilderment. Dr. Marcus Webb took another step forward, his movements slow and deliberate, as though approaching a skittish animal. The crystalline structures behind him pulsed in rhythm with his footsteps, their blue luminescence brightening fractionally with each step he took. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Velsharik's enhanced vision caught the correlation immediately. The technology was responding to the human, not just functioning in his presence, but actively responding. "Commander," Webb said again, his voice gentle, almost apologetic, "I know how this looks. I know what you must be thinking. But we're not prisoners here, we're not victims, and we're certainly not dead." A wry smile crossed his weathered face. "Though I'll admit, for the first few weeks, we weren't entirely sure about that last part ourselves." Lieutenant Kavar, the Hrack's security chief, pushed forward, his massive frame imposing even among the diverse rescue team. His stone-like skin had darkened to a deep charcoal, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. "Doctor Webb, you and your team have been missing for 5 years. The Galactic Council declared you deceased 32 months ago. Your families held memorial services, and now you stand here, healthy and inexplicably alive, in a chamber that our sensors indicate should not be functioning." His voice dropped to a growl. "You will explain now." Maria Santos stepped forward, placing herself slightly between Webb and the armed security chief. Her dark eyes held the particular intensity that only mothers defending their young could summon, a look that transcended species barriers. "Lieutenant, we've been trapped in these ruins for 5 years, with no communication to the outside world. We survived impossible circumstances. We protected my daughter through conditions that would have killed seasoned soldiers. So perhaps you could lower your weapon and address us with the courtesy we've earned through sheer endurance." Sophie Santos, now 13 years old, peered from behind her mother with eyes that held far too much knowledge for someone her age. Her hair had grown long, braided in intricate patterns that seemed almost ceremonial. When she spoke, her voice carried an odd resonance, as if the chamber itself amplified her words. "They're scared, Mom. The crystalline guardians frightened them. They don't understand yet." Velsharik's attention snapped to the child. "Crystalline guardians?" "Doctor." Sarah Chen, the xenoarchaeologist, moved to stand beside Webb. She was a slight woman, her Asian features now marked by faint patterns of silvery scarring on her hands and forearms. Burn marks, Velsharik recognized, from energy discharge. Old burns, long healed. "That's what we call them," she explained, gesturing to the massive constructs integrated into the chamber walls. "The Ketharans left behind more than ruins, Commander. They left behind caretakers, waiting for someone who could awaken them, someone who could remember." "Remember what?" Velsharik demanded, his military training reasserting itself over his shock. "Humans have no connection to the Ketharan ascendancy. Your species didn't even exist when this civilization fell. What could you possibly remember?" Dr. Webb's expression shifted, becoming almost sad. "Not memories of events, Commander. Memories encoded in our very neurology. Patterns of thought, emotional resonance, cognitive architecture. The Ketharans discovered something fundamental about consciousness itself. They learned that certain species, certain neural structures, carry forward echoes of older forms of awareness. They built these ruins as archives, as sanctuaries, as tests, and they encoded the access protocols in a way that only specific types of consciousness could trigger." He gestured to the 7 humans gathered in the chamber. "We didn't choose to awaken this place, Commander. It chose us. The moment we descended past the outer levels, the moment Sophie touched one of the interface pillars, the ruins recognized something in us, in our humanity, and they welcomed us home." Dr. Raj Patel, the engineer, stepped forward with the enthusiasm of someone about to deliver a lecture he'd been rehearsing for years. His hands moved animatedly as he spoke, his Indian accent still thick despite decades of galactic travel. "The power systems alone are revolutionary, Commander. The Ketharans developed energy matrices that draw from quantum foam fluctuations, essentially pulling power from the substrate of reality itself. These systems have been operating for 10,000 years without degradation because they're not operating on stored energy. They're tapping into the fundamental structure of space-time." "That's impossible," interjected Dr. Zilthran, the rescue team's archaeological specialist. "No known civilization has achieved that level of quantum manipulation. The theoretical models suggest it would require computational capabilities millions of times beyond what the Galactic Council believes possible," interrupted Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the linguist, her Japanese accent crisp. "Yes, we're aware. We've had 5 years to study it, to live with it, to learn from it. The Ketharans were operating on principles of physics that the modern galaxy doesn't even have names for yet." Commander Velsharik felt his certainty crumbling like ancient stone. Everything in his training, everything in his experience, told him this was wrong. Humans were newcomers, barely civilized by galactic standards, prone to emotional excess and irrational decision-making. They weren't supposed to unlock the secrets of extinct civilizations that had baffled the greatest minds of the Galactic Council for millennia. And yet, here they stood, 7 impossible survivors, surrounded by technology that responded to them as though they were its rightful inheritors. "How did you survive?" Velsharik asked, his voice softer now, genuinely curious despite his resistance. 5 years without resupply. The original expedition reports indicated you brought supplies for 3 months, expecting to conduct a preliminary survey and return for additional resources. Lieutenant James Morrison, the security officer, laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "We nearly didn't survive, Commander. The first month was hell. We were trapped when the upper passages collapsed behind us. Our communication equipment was destroyed. We had food for 90 days and water for 60. We were facing death by starvation, surrounded by wonders we couldn't understand and couldn't access. He moved to one of the chamber's walls and placed his hand against the smooth surface. Immediately, a section of the wall became translucent, revealing a view into an adjacent space filled with what appeared to be organic growth chambers. Then Sophie touched one of the interface pillars, and everything changed. All eyes turned to the teenager. Sophie Santos shifted uncomfortably under the attention, her fingers unconsciously tracing patterns in the air, patterns that Velsharik realized with a jolt matched the symbols inscribed throughout the ruins. The child was unconsciously writing in Ketharan script. Maria Santos's arm tightened protectively around her daughter. Sophie has always been special. Synesthetic perception, enhanced pattern recognition, neurodivergent in ways that most people never understood. On Earth, specialists said she'd need assistance her whole life. Here, in these ruins, those differences made her the key. I could hear them, Sophie said quietly, her voice distant, as though remembering a dream. When we were lost and scared and running out of food, I could hear the ruins singing, not with sound but with feeling. They were asking questions, testing us, wanting to know if we were the ones they'd been waiting for. Dr. Chen continued the explanation, her scientific precision providing structure to Sophie's ethereal description. The Ketharan interface systems operate on a combination of electromagnetic induction and something we can only describe as directed empathy. They read neural patterns, emotional states, intention structures. Most species in the current galactic civilization have neural architectures optimized for logic, hierarchy, and structured thought. Humans, especially humans like Sophie, retain more chaotic, more emotionally integrated cognitive patterns. The Ketharans valued that, Webb added. They built their greatest works to respond not to cold logic, but to consciousness that could hold multiple contradictory truths simultaneously, that could feel deeply while thinking clearly, that could be both rational and emotional without seeing those states as opposition. He gestured to the crystalline structures. When Sophie interfaced with the system, she didn't just access a computer. She had a conversation, and the ruins, the guardians, they recognized in her, in all of us, the cognitive signature they'd been programmed to respond to. They accepted us, and then they provided for us. Dr. Patel pulled up a holographic display from his worn personal data pad, showing schematics that made Velsharik's translator briefly stutter trying to process the concepts. The ruins have complete life support capabilities, atmospheric processors that can sustain hundreds of individuals indefinitely, fabrication systems that can produce food, water, medicine, clothing, anything we needed. They even repaired our damaged equipment, though we couldn't use most of it once we understood we weren't leaving. Weren't leaving? Velsharik's mandibles clicked sharply. You were trapped, imprisoned by circumstance. At first, Morrison admitted. But after the first year, after we'd learned to truly interface with the systems, after we understood what we'd found, Commander, we chose to stay. We chose to continue learning, because what we discovered here is too important to bring back without understanding it fully. Too dangerous, Maria corrected firmly. Too dangerous to let the Galactic Council access before we understood the implications. That statement hung in the air like a challenge. Velsharik felt his warrior instincts surge. Are you suggesting you deliberately maintained silence? That you allowed your own government, your own families to believe you dead while you... What? Played with ancient toys? Maria's eyes flashed with anger. I allowed my daughter's grandparents to think she was dead. I allowed my sister to mourn me. Do you think that was easy, Commander? Do you think I made that choice lightly? Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. I'm a medical officer. I took an oath to protect life, and when I understood what the Ketharans had left behind, when I saw what the Galactic Council would do with that knowledge, I made the hardest choice of my life. I chose to protect something more important than my own comfort or my family's grief. And what precisely is so important that it justified that sacrifice? Velsharik demanded. Dr. Webb's expression became grave. Commander, the Ketharans didn't fall. They didn't collapse from war or plague or natural disaster. They chose to leave. They achieved a level of technological and philosophical advancement that made physical existence obsolete. They transcended. Legends, Velsharik said dismissively. Mystical nonsense that is documented in every wall of these ruins, Tanaka interrupted. I've translated 3,000 hours of inscriptions. The Ketharans left behind a complete record. They achieved post-physical existence, Commander. They became patterns of pure consciousness, encoded in quantum fields, existing beyond the limitations of matter and energy as we understand it. She moved to another wall and activated a display that showed cascading symbols transforming into holographic representations. But before they left, they looked back at the younger races emerging in the galaxy. They saw species following the same path they'd walked, toward greater logic, greater efficiency, greater separation of mind and matter. And they realized that path had a cost. It sacrificed something fundamental, something about the messy, emotional, contradictory nature of biological consciousness that couldn't be preserved in pure information. Dr. Chen picked up the thread. So they built archives, sanctuaries, places where the path not taken could be preserved. They encoded their deepest knowledge in a way that only species who retained the inefficient traits of emotional integration, empathetic cognition, and chaotic neural organization could access. They were protecting not just information, but a way of being, a way of experiencing existence. And they left guardians, Sophie added, her young voice carrying unexpected weight. The crystalline structures aren't just machines. They're fragments of Ketharan consciousness that chose to remain behind, locked in semi-physical form, waiting to teach the right inheritors. Webb met Velsharik's compound eyes directly. Humanity isn't unique in the galaxy, Commander, but we are rare. Our neural architecture, our emotional volatility, our irrational compassion and illogical courage, these aren't flaws in galactic society. They're the very traits the Ketharans identified as precious, as worth preserving, as the foundation for a different kind of transcendence than the one they achieved. You're saying these ruins were left specifically for humans? Velsharik's tone balanced between skepticism and unwilling wonder. Not specifically for humans, Morrison clarified. The Ketharans couldn't have known our species would evolve, but they left their legacy for whatever species emerged that matched the cognitive profile. That happened to be us. We were the ones who could hear the ruins singing. We were the ones who could awaken the Guardians. Velsharik turned to his medical officer, a being from a species that communicated primarily through color-shifting skin patterns. Dr. Shelmis, scan them. Full biological workup. I want to know if they've been altered, if they're under any form of technological influence or mental manipulation. Dr. Shelmis moved forward, her portable medical scanner humming to life. The 7 humans submitted to the examination without protest, though Velsharik noticed that Maria kept Sophie close. Her maternal instinct never fully relaxed. After 15 minutes of intensive scanning, Shelmis's skin shifted through a complex pattern that Velsharik's translator rendered as profound confusion mixed with scientific fascination. Commander, they're completely unaltered, genetically baseline human. No technological implants, no neural modifications, no evidence of mental conditioning or coercion. If anything, they're healthier than baseline readings. Better bone density, improved cardiovascular efficiency, optimal cellular regeneration. They're not just survivors, they're thriving. The ruins take care of those they accept, Patel explained. The life support systems are adaptive. They optimize environmental conditions for biological well-being. We're healthier now than when we arrived. Velsharik felt the last of his rational objections crumbling. These were not hostages or victims. They were not deluded or manipulated. They were 7 humans who had, through a combination of circumstances and inherent traits, unlocked something that had remained hidden for 10,000 years. And they had done it by being exactly what the galactic establishment had always dismissed them for: emotional, chaotic, irrationally compassionate, and fundamentally human. Ambassador Vasquez is en route, Velsharik said finally. She'll arrive within the day. You'll need to present your findings to her and eventually to the Galactic Council. They will not accept this easily. The political implications alone are why we stayed silent, Webb interrupted. Commander, imagine what would happen if the Galactic Council learned that ancient technology of unimaginable power could be accessed by humans but not by them. Imagine the fear, the resentment, the scramble for control. Imagine what the Corthan Mining Consortium would do if they knew what these ruins really contain. Velsharik didn't need to imagine. He'd served in the military long enough to know exactly how power imbalances were resolved in galactic politics. They would claim the ruins, forcibly if necessary. They would attempt to reverse engineer the technology, and failing that, they would destroy it to prevent human advantage. Exactly, Maria said. That's why we chose Sophie's safety, chose our mission's secrecy over our own comfort. We needed time to understand what we'd found before the galaxy's power structures could tear it apart. The chamber pulsed with soft light, the crystalline guardians humming in harmonics that seemed almost like approval. Velsharik realized with a start that the machines, The fragments of ancient consciousness had been listening to the entire conversation. They were aware, they were present, and they were protective of these 7 humans who had awakened them. "What happens now?" Velsharak asked, the question directed at no one in particular. Dr. Webb's smile returned, tired but determined. "Now, Commander, we teach you. We show you what we've learned. We help you understand why the Ketharans believe that species like humanity, imperfect, emotional, beautifully chaotic, might be the ones to finally achieve what they could not. Not transcendence through logic, but transcendence through wholeness." He extended his hand, a gesture of human greeting that Velsharak had always found oddly intimate. "We're not your enemies, Commander. We're the inheritors of a legacy that belongs to all of us. To everyone who retains the capacity to feel deeply while thinking clearly, to embrace contradiction, to value compassion as much as efficiency." Velsharak stared at the offered hand for a long moment. His entire career had been built on the certainty of galactic hierarchy, on the established order where ancient races led and younger species followed. These 7 humans, these impossible survivors, were offering to overturn everything he thought he understood about the nature of civilization itself. Finally, with a gesture that felt like stepping off a cliff, Velsharak extended one of his 4 arms and clasped the human's hand. "Show me," he said. The crystalline guardians pulsed with brilliant blue light, and the chamber sang with approval. The teaching had begun. Ambassador Elena Vasquez arrived at Kethara 9 16 hours after receiving the impossible news, her diplomatic transport cutting through the planet's atmosphere with the urgency of someone racing toward either salvation or catastrophe. She had spent the entire journey oscillating between desperate hope and paralyzing fear, her mind unable to settle on which emotion would prove more appropriate. The shuttle touched down at the excavation site in a cloud of rust-colored dust. Helena emerged before the engines had fully powered down, her formal diplomatic attire already coated in the planet's grit. She didn't care. 7 people she had mourned, 7 lives she had written off as lost to humanity's ambitious reach into the unknown, might actually be alive. Commander Velsharak met her at the entrance to the ruins, his compound eyes reflecting the harsh light of Kethara's twin suns. "Ambassador Vasquez, the expedition members are indeed alive and in remarkably good health. However, I must warn you, the situation is far more complex than a simple rescue operation." "I don't care about complexity, Commander," Elena said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "I care about seeing my people now." The descent into the ruins felt like falling through layers of time itself. Elena had reviewed the original expedition reports dozens of times, but those dry academic descriptions had failed to capture the oppressive strangeness of Ketharan architecture. The walls seemed to shift at the edge of her vision. The inscriptions pulsed with faint luminescence that her brain insisted couldn't be real. The air itself felt thick with presence, as though the ruins were aware of her passage through them. "The chamber is 2 kilometers below the surface," Velsharak explained, as they traveled through passages that descended at angles that made Elena's inner ear protest. "The expedition team has made it fully habitable. They have—" He paused, his mandibles clicking in what Elena had learned to recognize as uncertainty. "They have integrated themselves into the ruins systems in ways that our experts are still attempting to understand." Elena barely heard him. Her heart was pounding too loudly, her breath coming too quickly. 5 years. Sophie Santos had been 8 years old when the expedition vanished. If she was alive, she would be 13 now, half her childhood stolen, buried in alien darkness. What would that do to a child? What scars would that leave? The passage opened into the vast chamber, and Elena stopped breathing entirely. They were there, all 7 of them, standing in a space that glowed with soft blue light, surrounded by crystalline structures that looked less like machines and more like living things frozen mid-thought. They looked healthy, more than healthy. They looked vibrant, purposeful, complete. "Elena," Dr. Marcus Webb's voice carried across the chamber, warm and familiar, and impossibly real. He walked toward her with the measured stride of someone who had walked this space 1,000 times, who belonged here. "It's good to see you. We've missed the outside world more than I can express." Elena's diplomatic training deserted her entirely. She crossed the remaining distance at a run and threw her arms around the old scientist, tears streaming down her face without permission. "Marcus, you son of a bitch, you died. I signed your death certificate. I spoke at your memorial. I told your daughter you were gone." Webb's arms wrapped around her, solid and real and alive. "I know. God, Elena, I know. We heard nothing from outside for 5 years. We had no way to tell you we'd survived. And then, after we understood what we'd found, we made the choice to remain silent. That weight falls on me, on all of us. And I'm so sorry. Maria Santos approached, Sophie's hand clasped firmly in hers. Elena released Webb and stared at the woman she'd only met once, at the pre-expedition briefing 5 years ago. Maria had been confident then, professional, her medical credentials impeccable, but her decision to bring her 8-year-old daughter on a dangerous expedition, controversial at best. Now Maria looked simultaneously stronger and more fragile, like steel that had been tempered through fire. And Sophie, "Hello, Ambassador Vasquez," Sophie said softly, her teenage voice carrying odd harmonics that made Elena's teeth ache faintly. "Mom told me about you. She said you fought for our expedition when the council wanted to deny our permits." Eleanor knelt down to Sophie's eye level, though the girl was nearly as tall as her mother now. "Sophie, sweetheart, are you okay? Has anyone hurt you? Are you—" Her voice broke. "Are you all right?" Sophie's eyes, too old, too knowing for 13, met Elena's with disconcerting directness. "I'm more than all right, Ambassador. I'm home. This place, these ruins, they're what I was meant to find." "What was meant to find me?" She smiled, and for a moment she looked like just a kid. "I know that sounds weird. I know you probably think we've been brainwashed or something, but it's true. I can feel it." Maria's hand tightened on her daughter's shoulder. "Sophie is safe, Ambassador. I've never let her out of my sight for 5 years. Every decision we made, every risk we took was calculated to protect her while honoring the magnitude of what we'd discovered." Eleanor stood slowly, her diplomat's mind reasserting control over her emotions. She looked around the chamber, truly seeing it for the first time. The crystalline structures pulsed in rhythm with the human's breathing. The walls displayed symbols that shifted and rearranged themselves in patterns that suggested language, mathematics, and something beyond both. The air hummed with power that her instruments couldn't properly measure. "Marcus," she said carefully, "Commander Velsharik mentioned complexity. I need you to explain exactly what's happening here. All of it. Because I came here to rescue survivors, but I'm looking at something that's going to trigger every alarm in the Galactic Council chambers." Webb nodded gravely. "You're right to be concerned. What we've discovered here will fundamentally alter humanity's position in galactic civilization. It will also make us a target. That's why we need your help, Elena. We need you to help us navigate the political storm that's coming." Over the next 6 hours, the expedition team walked Elena through their 5 years of discovery, survival, and revelation. They showed her the life support systems that drew power from quantum fluctuations in space-time itself. They demonstrated the interface pillars that responded to human neural patterns in ways they couldn't replicate for other species. They revealed the vast archives of Ketharan knowledge encoded in formats that required not just intellectual comprehension, but emotional resonance to decode. Dr. Sarah Chen led Eleanor through chamber after chamber of wonders, her xenoarchaeologist's enthusiasm barely contained. The Ketharans mapped consciousness itself, Elena. They understood that intelligence isn't a single linear path from primitive to advanced. They identified at least 17 distinct cognitive architectures that could support technological civilization, and they documented the strengths and weaknesses of each. She pulled up holographic displays, showing complex diagrams that Elena's translator struggled to process. The current dominant species in the Galactic Council, the Vashreen, the Hrax, the Quarians, they all share what the Ketharans classified as Type 7 architecture. Logic-dominant hierarchical, optimized for efficiency and structured problem-solving, excellent for building stable civilizations, terrible for breakthrough innovation or adaptive thinking in crisis situations. "And humans?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Type 3 architecture," Dr. Yuki Tanaka interjected, pulling up comparative analyses. "Emotionally integrated, chaos-tolerant, capable of holding contradictory concepts simultaneously without cognitive breakdown." The Ketharans noted that Type 3 species are rare, maybe one in every 10,000 civilizations. They're usually too unstable to achieve technological civilization. They destroy themselves through internal conflict before reaching spaceflight. But when they do survive their own chaos, Webb continued, they're capable of leaps of understanding that other cognitive types literally cannot conceive. The Ketharans believed that Type 3 architecture was the key to the next phase of consciousness evolution. Not the transcendence they achieved, they saw that as a dead end actually, but something else, something they couldn't quite envision, but desperately wanted to preserve the possibility of. Lieutenant James Morrison brought Elena to what they called the Memorial Wall, a section of the chamber where the team had inscribed their own history. The first month was survival, pure and simple, he explained, his security officer's pragmatism cutting through the mysticism. We rationed food, we explored desperately for exits that didn't exist, we watched our water supplies dwindle and prepared to die. His hand traced over inscriptions they'd made in the Kitharan walls, dates, events, small victories, and crushing defeats. Then Sophie touched the interface pillar, and the ruins woke up, not all at once, but gradually, like a person waking from deep sleep. The first thing they gave us was water, just water, flowing from a wall system that had been dormant for 10,000 years. We cried, all of us, even me. Maria added her own testimony, her voice thick with memory. The food came next. The fabrication system started producing nutrient blocks, tasteless but perfectly calibrated to human biochemistry. Then the air systems came online. Then the medical bay. She showed Elena a chamber filled with crystalline structures that resembled a hospital more than any alien technology. When Sophie developed an infection from a scraped knee, the systems diagnosed it before I could and provided treatment protocols I'd never seen in any medical database. They kept my daughter alive, Ambassador. They kept all of us alive. Dr. Raj Patel demonstrated the engineering marvels with the enthusiasm of a child showing off a new toy. The power generation alone represents a quantum leap beyond anything the Galactic Council has achieved. And the computational capabilities, Elena, these systems can run simulations with 1 trillion variable inputs and produce results in milliseconds. They've been teaching me physics that won't be discovered by mainstream galactic science for centuries, but it was Sophie who showed Elena the deepest truth. The teenager led her to the central crystalline structure, the massive formation that dominated the chamber's heart. This is where I talk to them, Sophie said simply. The guardians, the fragments of Ketharan consciousness that stayed behind. She placed her small hand against the crystal, and the entire structure blazed with light. Elena gasped as the air filled with presence, not hostile, not quite friendly, but intensely aware. Images flooded her mind, too fast to fully process. Vast cities spanning continents, beings of pure thought moving through crystalline networks, a civilization reaching towards something beyond physical existence, and then a choice, a deliberate choice, to leave something behind, to preserve a path for those who would come after. They're lonely, Sophie whispered, her eyes distant. They've been waiting so long, and they're happy we're here. They want to teach us. They want to show us what we could become. The light faded, and Elena found herself sitting on the chamber floor, tears streaming down her face for reasons she couldn't articulate. Maria helped her up, her touch gentle but firm. Now you understand, Maria said softly. Now you understand why we stayed, why we chose silence. This isn't just archaeological discovery, Elena. This is legacy, this is inheritance. And the moment the Galactic Council learns about it, they'll either try to take it from us or destroy it, to prevent us from having it. Elena's diplomatic training reasserted itself, cold analysis cutting through wonder. You're right, the political implications are catastrophic. If the dominant species learn that ancient technology responds preferentially to human cognition, every xenophobic faction in the galaxy will have ammunition. The Korthan Consortium will claim the ruins under salvage rights. The Vashreen military will argue for containment. There will be species calling for human genetic modification to correct our cognitive architecture, and others calling for our exclusion from galactic society entirely. Or worse, Webb added grimly. There will be species who want to study us, dissect our neural patterns, breed us for the traits that make us compatible with Kitharan technology. We won't be citizens anymore, Elena. We'll be resources. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the crystalline guardians. Elena looked at each of the 7 expedition members in turn. Marcus Webb, the dismissed academic who'd proven his fringe theories correct. Sarah Chen, whose passion for xenoarchaeology had led to discoveries beyond imagination. James Morrison, the pragmatic soldier who'd kept them alive through impossible circumstances. Raj Patel, the engineer who'd learned to speak the language of ancient machines. Yuki Tanaka, the linguist who'd translated consciousness itself. Maria Santos, the mother who'd protected her child while protecting humanity's future, and Sophie Santos, the 13-year-old girl who'd become a bridge between human consciousness and alien legacy. They were heroes. Every one of them. They'd survived impossible odds, unlocked ancient mysteries, and made sacrifices that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They deserved recognition, celebration, gratitude. Instead, they were about to become the galaxy's most dangerous political problem. "What do you need from me?" Elena asked finally. Webb's expression showed relief and determination in equal measure. "Time. Preparation. We need to present this discovery on our terms, not as victims rescued from the ruins, but as researchers who've made unprecedented breakthroughs. We need to control the narrative before the Galactic Council can frame us as either dangerously exceptional or primitively lucky. And we need protection," Maria added fiercely, "specifically for Sophie. She's the key to all of this, and every power in the galaxy will want access to her. I need your word, Ambassador, that my daughter will be protected from being turned into an experimental subject." Elena met Maria's eyes directly. "You have my word, and Earth's protection. But I need something from all of you in return. I need complete honesty, no more secrets, because if I'm going to defend you in front of the Galactic Council, I need to know every detail of what you've discovered and what risks we're facing." "Agreed," Webb said immediately. The others nodded their consent. Commander Velsharik, who had remained silent throughout the entire demonstration, finally spoke. "Ambassador, I must formally report this situation to the Galactic Survey Corps command structure. That report will trigger multiple oversight protocols. You have perhaps 72 hours before representatives from the Council arrive to investigate. After that, the situation will be beyond your control, or mine." Elena's mind raced through diplomatic scenarios, political calculations, alliance structures. Earth had friends in the Galactic Council, species who valued human innovation, who traded fairly, who respected the principle of cognitive diversity. But Earth also had enemies, and more dangerously, had species who viewed humanity with contempt masked as concern. "Then we have 72 hours to prepare," Elena said with finality. "Marcus, I need a comprehensive briefing document detailing every discovery, every capability, every potential application. Sarah, I need academic papers establishing the archaeological significance and the legal framework for claiming Ketharan legacy under existing galactic treaty law. Raj, I need technical specifications that demonstrate the defensive rather than offensive applications of what you've learned. Yuki, I need linguistic and cultural analysis proving that the Ketharans intended their legacy for species matching human cognitive patterns." She turned to Maria and Sophie. "And you two, I need you to be ready to demonstrate your connection to the Guardians in a controlled, documentable way that proves you're not being manipulated or controlled. The Council will try to argue that the technology is influencing you. We need to prove that you're exercising free will and informed consent." "We can do that," Maria said firmly, her arm around Sophie's shoulders. "My daughter is not a victim or a puppet. She's a pioneer." Sophie smiled, a genuine teenage smile that cut through all the cosmic significance. "I'm also really hungry. Do you think maybe we could have actual food instead of nutrient blocks? I haven't had pizza in 5 years." The tension broke, and several people laughed, real, human laughter that echoed through the ancient chamber. Even Commander Velsharik's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "I think we can arrange pizza," Elena said, feeling her own smile despite the weight of impending crisis. "But after that we work, because in 72 hours, the most powerful entities in the galaxy are going to be very interested in 7 humans who refused to die, and an ancient civilization that chose them as inheritors." Webb nodded solemnly. "Then let's make sure we're ready. We've survived 5 years in the darkness. We can survive the light." The crystalline guardians pulsed with approval, their ancient consciousness bearing witness to humanity's next great trial. The easy part, surviving impossible odds, was over. Now came the hard part, surviving success. The 72 hours passed like water through desperate fingers. The expedition team worked without sleep, fueled by adrenaline, and the knowledge that their words would either legitimize humanity's claim to Ketharan legacy or condemn them to being dissected by galactic bureaucracy. Ambassador Elena Vasquez coordinated everything from a temporary command center established in one of the ruins' outer chambers, her diplomatic staff flooding in from 3 neighboring systems to provide support. "Doctor, Marcus Webb compiled 5 years of research into documentation that could withstand academic scrutiny from species with 10 times humanity's scientific experience. Dr. Sarah Chen constructed legal arguments based on precedents stretching back 2,000 years of galactic treaty law. Dr. Raj Patel prepared demonstrations of Ketharan technology that would prove capability without revealing vulnerability. Dr. Yuki Tanaka translated inscriptions that would establish the Ketharans' intent for their legacy. Lieutenant James Morrison trained the team in presentation protocols, teaching them how to stand, how to speak, how to project confidence without arrogance when facing beings who viewed humans as barely evolved primates. Maria Santos prepared Sophie for what would be the most important performance of her young life, coaching her daughter to demonstrate her connection to the Guardians while protecting the deepest intimacies of that bond. And through it all, the crystalline Guardians watched, their ancient consciousness humming with something that felt disturbingly like anticipation. When the Galactic Council's delegation arrived, they came in force. 3 massive vessels descended into Kethara 9's atmosphere, carrying representatives from 17 different species. The ships landed at the excavation site with the kind of precise, aggressive efficiency that spoke of military training beneath diplomatic courtesy. High Arbiter Thelkazor led the delegation, a Vortan whose species had served as the galaxy's primary judicial authority for 8 centuries. His body was serpentine, scaled in iridescent silver, with 6 independently articulating sensory stalks that constantly sampled the environment. Behind him came the delegation, Vashreen military observers, Harak's cultural assessors, Quarian technological specialists and representatives from a dozen other species, each bringing their own agendas and prejudices. Elena met them at the surface, her diplomatic credentials transmitted through official channels, her posture carefully calibrated to show respect without submission. High Arbiter Thelkazor, the human diplomatic mission welcomes the Galactic Council's delegation. The expedition survivors are prepared to present their findings and submit to whatever inquiries the Council deems appropriate. Thelkazor's sensory stalks tasted the air around Elena, a gesture that would have been invasive in human culture, but was merely procedural in Vortan custom. Ambassador Vasquez, the Council is pleased to learn of your citizens' survival. However, the circumstances surrounding that survival have raised significant concerns. We are here to determine the nature of the technology you have accessed and whether your continued presence in these ruins represents a threat to galactic security. The words were diplomatic, but the subtext was clear. Humanity was on trial. The delegation descended into the ruins with an armed escort, 20 soldiers from various species, their weapons visible but not yet drawn. Elena noted their presence with cold calculation. The Council was prepared for hostility. They were prepared for humans to have been corrupted or weaponized by ancient technology. They were prepared for anything except the truth. When the delegation entered the main chamber, the reaction was immediate and visceral. Several species stopped mid-stride, their various sensory organs overwhelmed by the active Ketharan technology. The crystalline Guardians pulsed with light, their presence filling the space with an awareness that transcended simple machinery. "Impossible," breathed Dr. Zelmarath, the Quarian technological specialist who floated at the delegation's center. His translucent body flickered with colors that indicated extreme agitation. "These systems have been dormant for 10 millennia. Our own expeditions to Ketharan sites have never achieved activation." "How?" "They responded to us," Sophie Santos said simply, stepping forward from where the expedition team stood in a careful formation. Her voice carried through the chamber with that odd resonance that came from 5 years of interfacing with alien consciousness. "When we were dying, when we had given up hope, I touched one of the interface pillars, and they woke up because they recognized something in us." High Arbiter. Thelkazor's sensory stalks focused entirely on the teenager. "You are the child, Sophie Santos, age 13 standard years, the youngest member of the expedition. You claim responsibility for activating technology that has defied the greatest minds in the galaxy?" "I don't claim it, High Arbiter," Sophie replied, with a calmness that would have been impossible for most 13-year-olds facing galactic authority. "I'm just stating what happened. I touched the pillar. The ruins recognized my neural patterns, and they decided to help us." "Decided," repeated Commander Kelvoth, a Vashreen military observer whose mandibles clicked with barely concealed hostility. "You attribute consciousness to ancient machines. You suggest that 10,000-year-old technology made a choice to favor your species over all others. That is either profound arrogance or evidence of mental manipulation. Maria Santos stepped forward, placing herself slightly in front of her daughter. It's neither, Commander. It's documented fact. We have 5 years of logs, recordings, and interaction data. The Ketharan systems don't just respond to commands. They evaluate, they choose, they teach. They are semi-autonomous fragments of Ketharan consciousness that chose to remain in physical form after their civilization transcended. Dr. Webb moved to the central holographic display, activating the presentation they'd spent 3 days perfecting. High Arbiter honored delegates, what you're witnessing is the result of a fundamental discovery about consciousness itself. The Ketharans developed a taxonomy of cognitive architectures, 17 distinct types, each with unique strengths and limitations. They encoded their deepest legacy in a format that could only be accessed by specific cognitive types. Humanity happens to match the access parameters. The holographic display showed comparative neural scans, cognitive mapping, and the complex algorithms the Ketharans had embedded in their interface systems. Dr. Sarah Chen provided archaeological context, showing inscriptions from 36 Ketharan sites that all contained variations of the same message, for the ones who remember with their hearts as much as their minds. This is not human exceptionalism, Chen argued passionately. This is cognitive diversity. The Ketharans recognize that intelligence takes many forms, and they specifically preserve their legacy for forms that the current galactic civilization has systematically devalued. Forms that prioritize emotional integration, adaptive chaos, and empathetic processing alongside logical analysis. Dr. Raj Patel demonstrated the technology itself, showing how the systems responded to human neural patterns in ways they didn't for other species. He had Commander Velsharak and other non-human rescuers attempt to interface with the same pillars that Sophie had activated. The results were unambiguous. The systems registered their presence but remained dormant, waiting for the cognitive signature they'd been programmed to recognize. It's not that humans are better, Patel explained carefully. It's that we're different in specific ways the Ketharans valued, ways that most galactic civilization has evolved away from in favor of efficiency and logical optimization. High Arbiter Thelkazor's sensory stalks rippled with complex patterns. Your argument is that an ancient civilization specifically designed their legacy to exclude the majority of galactic species in favor of cognitive architectures that you claim humanity possesses. You must understand how this appears, Dr. Patel. It appears to be a convenient justification for claiming exclusive rights to technology of incalculable value. With respect, High Arbiter, Elena interjected, her diplomatic training allowing her to deliver challenge wrapped in courtesy. The Council is framing this situation incorrectly. These 7 humans did not invade Ketharan ruins seeking advantage. They came as researchers, following proper authorization protocols. They nearly died in the darkness. And when ancient technology responded to their specific cognitive traits, traits they were born with, not traits they engineered, they survived. They didn't claim anything. They were chosen by systems that predate galactic civilization itself. Chosen, Commander Kelvoth repeated with obvious disdain. A religious framing for technological access. Next, you will claim divine right to Ketharan legacy. Not divine right, Dr. Webb said firmly. Evolutionary compatibility. The Ketharans left their technology like a key searching for the right lock. For 10,000 years, that lock remained closed because no species with the right cognitive architecture had found it. Now we have. That's not mysticism, Commander. That's biology meeting intention. The delegation broke into smaller groups, specialists converging on different aspects of the chamber. The Quarian technologists swarmed the crystalline guardians, their scanning equipment painting the structures with exotic radiation. The Hrax cultural assessors examined the inscriptions, their massive stone-like bodies moving with surprising delicacy. The Vashreen military observers studied the chamber's layout with tactical precision, already calculating how this space could be secured, controlled, or if necessary, destroyed. And through it all, Sophie Santos stood at the center of the chamber, her hand resting lightly on the primary interface pillar. The crystalline guardians pulsed in rhythm with her breathing, making it impossible to ignore the connection. High Arbiter Thelkazor approached the teenager directly, his sensory stalks extending to their full length. Young one, I must ask you questions that may be uncomfortable. The Council must determine whether you are exercising free will or if you have been compromised by alien technology. Do you understand? I understand, High Arbiter, Sophie replied, her young voice steady. You think the Guardians are controlling me. You think I'm a puppet of ancient machines. Are you? Sophie closed her eyes, and the chamber responded. The crystalline structures blazed with light, not threatening, but overwhelming in their intensity. Images flooded the space, not projected on screens, but somehow present in the air itself, visible to all species regardless of their sensory apparatus. The delegation saw what Sophie had experienced, the terror of being trapped and dying, the moment of connection when the ruins recognized her consciousness, the slow building of trust between a child and fragments of alien awareness, the teaching and learning that had sustained her for 5 years. But more than memories, they felt what Sophie felt. For just a moment, every being in that chamber experienced the Guardians' perspective, their loneliness across 10,000 years, their careful patience, their joy at finally finding consciousness they could communicate with, their protective affection for the small human who had awakened them. The images faded, and the delegation stood in stunned silence. Several species were trembling, others had adopted defensive postures. The Quarian specialist was pulsing colors that indicated his people's equivalent of tears. I'm not controlled, Sophie said quietly. I'm connected. There's a difference. The Guardians teach me, protect me, care for me, but they never force me to do anything. They never invade my thoughts without permission. They're like very old, very patient teachers who've been waiting a long time for students. Maria wrapped her arm around Sophie's shoulders, her maternal protectiveness radiating outward. My daughter has agency, High Arbiter. I've watched her every day for 5 years. I'm a medical officer. I know the signs of mental manipulation, of coercion, of personality alteration. Sophie is herself, just herself, with access to knowledge and connection that I don't have. That's not control. That's education. One of the delegates, a being Elena didn't immediately recognize, stepped forward. She was elegant and crystalline herself, her species adapted to high-gravity worlds where silicon-based life had evolved alongside carbon. Her name was Shelitha, and she spoke with a voice like crystal chimes. I am moved by what I have witnessed. This child has achieved communion with Ketharan consciousness. This is not exploitation or control. This is the rarest of gifts, mutual recognition across species boundaries, across time itself. A touching sentiment, Commander Kelvoth said coldly. It does not address the strategic implications. These ruins contain technology that could revolutionize energy production, computational capabilities, possibly even weapons development. And access is restricted to one species, a species that has been part of galactic civilization for barely 2 centuries. The Council cannot permit such asymmetry. What exactly are you suggesting, Commander? Elena asked, her diplomatic mask slipping to reveal steel beneath. That humanity should be denied access to technology that responds to our cognitive architecture, that we should be punished for being compatible with ancient systems. Or are you suggesting something more sinister, that humans should be modified, studied, or controlled to prevent us from exercising capabilities we were born with? The chamber erupted into argument. Multiple delegates spoke simultaneously, their translation systems creating a cacophony of competing viewpoints. Some argued for human sovereignty, citing precedents from first contact law. Others demanded council oversight, claiming that such powerful technology required collective governance. Still others suggested more extreme measures, genetic screening programs, mandatory cognitive modification, even quarantine protocols that would isolate humanity from broader galactic society. High Arbiter, Thelkazor raised one of his sensory stalks, a gesture that commanded silence through sheer authority. Enough. This delegation will not resolve these questions through debate. We require time to consult our respective governments, to review the data thoroughly, to consider the implications fully. He turned to face the 7 expedition members directly. Dr. Webb, Dr. Chen, Dr. Santos, Dr. Patel, Dr. Tanaka, Lieutenant Morrison, and young Sophie Santos. You have survived impossible circumstances. You have made discoveries of profound significance. The Council acknowledges your courage and your dedication to knowledge. His tone shifted, becoming formal and absolute. However, the Council also recognizes that your presence in these ruins and your connection to active Ketharan technology represents an unprecedented situation requiring careful governance. Effective immediately, this site is declared a protected archaeological zone under joint oversight of the Galactic Council and Human Diplomatic Mission. No technology may be removed from the ruins. No additional personnel may access the active systems without Council approval, and all expedition members must submit to ongoing monitoring to ensure the continued safety of both humanity and the greater galactic community. "You're imprisoning us," Maria said flatly. "You're calling it protection, but you're imprisoning us again, in the same ruins where we nearly died." "You will not be confined to the ruins, Dr. Santos," Thelkazor clarified. "You may return to the surface, to your families, to Earth itself if you choose, but the active systems must remain under observation. The Guardians, as you call them, cannot be allowed to operate without oversight." Sophie's hand tightened on the interface pillar, and the Guardians responded with a pulse of light that felt like distress. "They don't want to be alone again," she said, her teenage voice cracking. "They were alone for 10,000 years. We can't leave them. We can't abandon them." "You are not abandoning them, child," Thelkazor said, his tone softening fractionally. "You are allowing the galaxy to understand them. Is that not what the Ketharans would have wanted? For their legacy to be shared, understood, integrated into the greater community of conscious beings?" Dr. Webb stepped forward, his weathered face showing every one of his years. "High Arbiter, with all due respect, you're making a fundamental error. You're approaching this like a negotiation over resources, but the Guardians aren't resources. They're people, fragments of people, remnants of consciousness that chose to remain behind to teach and protect. You can't govern them like territory. You can't oversight them like technology. They're alive in ways that matter more than whether they have bodies." "Then what do you propose?" Thelkazor asked. "Sovereignty," Elena said clearly, her ambassador's authority filling the chamber. "Grant these ruins status as a semi-autonomous entity under human stewardship. Recognize that the Guardians have chosen their representatives, these 7 humans, and respect that choice. Allow continued research, continued learning, but under frameworks that acknowledge this is not human property. This is partnership. This is inheritance, freely given." Commander Kelvoth's mandibles clicked aggressively. "Preposterous. You're suggesting we grant political standing to ancient machines and primitive—" He caught himself, but the damage was done. "To one species based on claimed spiritual connection." "Not spiritual," Dr. Yuki Tanaka interjected, her linguistic precision cutting through the emotional tension. "Neurological, measurable, repeatable. We've documented every aspect of the interface protocols. We can demonstrate exactly why human cognitive architecture triggers the Guardians' response systems. This isn't mysticism, Commander. This is science you don't want to accept, because it challenges galactic hierarchy." The argument resumed, more heated than before. Eleanor watched the delegates fracture along predictable lines, those who valued cognitive diversity and precedent versus those who feared human advantage and demanded control. The expedition team stood together at the chamber's center, surrounded by crystalline Guardians that hummed with increasing agitation. Finally, High Arbiter Thelkazor raised both his primary sensory stalks, commanding absolute silence. "The Council will deliberate. A decision will be rendered within 10 standard days. Until then, the current protocols remain in effect. This site is protected. The expedition members are free to move but monitored, and no technology is to be removed or replicated." He paused, his ancient eyes focusing on Sophie Santos. "Young one, you have shown us something remarkable today. You have bridged a gap of 10,000 years. Whatever the Council decides, that achievement will not be forgotten." The delegation withdrew, leaving the expedition team alone with Ambassador Vasquez and Commander Velsharek. The chamber's light dimmed to its usual soft blue glow, the Guardians settling into quiet vigilance. "That could have gone worse," Eleanor said, though her expression suggested she was trying to convince herself. "Or better," Morrison replied grimly. "They're scared of us. All of them. Even the ones who defended us are scared of what we represent." "Change," Webb said softly. "We represent change. The possibility that the galactic order isn't natural law but simply current circumstance. That terrifies those who've built their power on the assumption of permanent hierarchy." Maria held Sophie close, her daughter trembling with exhaustion from the demonstration. "What happens in 10 days?" Maria asked. "What's the worst they can do?" No one answered immediately, but they all knew. The galaxy had ways of dealing with threats it couldn't control. Ways that were legal, efficient, and utterly devastating. The expedition team had survived 5 years in the darkness of Ketharan ruins. Now they would discover if they could survive the light of galactic politics. The crystalline guardians hummed softly, and in that sound, Sophie Santos heard something that might have been worry, or might have been determination. The ancient consciousness was learning new emotions from their human companions, and one of them was fear. The 10 days of deliberation felt like waiting for an execution. The expedition team remained on Kethara 9, technically free to leave, but unwilling to abandon the Guardians, and unable to abandon the legacy they'd discovered. Galactic Council observers monitored every movement, every conversation, every interaction with the crystalline structures. The ruins that had been their sanctuary now felt like a gilded cage. On the 3rd day, Earth responded. The communication came through official diplomatic channels, but the voices were anything but bureaucratic. Maria Santos stood in the temporary communications center established in one of the outer chambers, her hands trembling as she activated the private channel Elena Vasquez had secured for her. The holographic display resolved into the face of an older woman with Maria's eyes and iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Carmen Santos, Maria's mother, stared at her daughter as though seeing a ghost. "Maria," the word came out as barely a whisper. "Mija, they told us you were dead. We buried you. Her voice broke entirely, and she pressed her hand against the screen as though she could touch her daughter through the quantum-entangled photons. "Mama," Maria's own voice cracked, 5 years of suppressed grief flooding through her all at once. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry we couldn't tell you. I wanted to, every day I wanted to, but we couldn't risk—" "Sophie," Carmen interrupted, her eyes scanning the space behind Maria. "Where is my granddaughter? Is she— Please tell me she's—" Sophie appeared in the frame, taller now, older, different, but unmistakably herself. "Hi, Abuela, I'm okay, we're both okay." Carmen Santos collapsed into sobs, her hands covering her face. Through the connection, they could hear other voices. Maria's sister, Elena, no relation to the ambassador. Sophie's cousins, family members who had mourned for 5 years and were now confronting the impossible resurrection of their dead. "You let us think she was gone," came another voice, harder and angrier. Maria's sister appeared in the frame, her face twisted with fury and relief in equal measure. "You let Sophie's grandfather die thinking his granddaughter was dead. He had a heart attack 2 years ago, Maria. The grief, we think the grief killed him, and you were alive. You were alive the whole time." The words hit like physical blows. Maria's face went white, her hand reaching for Sophie, who pressed against her mother's side. "Elena, we couldn't what? Couldn't send a single message? Couldn't let us know you were alive? What was so important that you let your own father die thinking he'd lost both of you? The legacy of an entire, ancient civilization," Dr. Webb said quietly, stepping into the frame. "The future of humanity's place in the galaxy. The protection of technology that could either elevate us or paint targets on our backs. That's what was important enough." "And who the hell are you to decide that?" Elena Santos demanded, her anger finding a new target. "You took my sister and niece into those death trap ruins. This is your fault. All of this is your fault." Ambassador Vasquez intervened, her diplomatic training allowing her to cut through the emotion. "Miss Santos, I understand your anger. I truly do. But your sister and niece made choices, difficult, agonizing choices, based on circumstances you don't yet understand. Perhaps we should arrange a full briefing before—" "I don't want a briefing," Elena shouted. "I want my sister back. I want Sophie back. I want the 5 years we lost." "Can you give me that, Ambassador? Can any of your ancient alien technology give me that?" The communication descended into chaos, family members shouting, crying, demanding answers and apologies and explanations. Maria stood frozen in the center of it all, absorbing the pain she'd caused, the grief she'd generated, the relationships she'd shattered for the sake of mission and legacy. Finally, Sophie's voice cut through the noise. "We survived." The teenager's words carried that odd resonance that came from 5 years of interfacing with consciousness older than human civilization. "We survived when we should have died. Mom kept me alive. She protected me every single day. And yes, we stayed silent. Yes, we made choices that hurt you. But we did it because we discovered something that matters more than one family's grief. Something that matters for every human who will ever be born." The Santos family fell silent, confronted by the strange gravity of the 13-year-old girl who had left Earth as a child and was returning as something more complex. Carmen Santos wiped her eyes, her grandmother's instinct cutting through anger and grief. "Sophie, baby, what happened to you down there? You sound different." "I grew up, Abuela," Sophie said simply, "in the dark, surrounded by voices 10,000 years old, learning things that humans aren't supposed to know yet. I grew up." The conversation continued for another hour, painful and cathartic in turns. Other family members took their turns speaking to the survivors, their emotions ranging from joy to rage to incomprehension. Dr. Webb spoke with his daughter, a woman in her 40s who had raised her own children believing their grandfather was dead. Lieutenant Morrison connected with his ex-wife, who had remarried after his memorial service. Dr. Patel learned that his parents had used his death as a catalyst to establish a scholarship fund in his name. Each conversation carried its own weight of complicated grief. The pain of those who had mourned, meeting the guilt of those who had allowed that mourning to continue when they could have prevented it. But it was Dr. Sarah Chen's conversation that revealed the deeper political implications. Her mother, Dr. Lily Chen, was a prominent xenoarchaeologist herself, respected in both human and galactic academic circles. When her face appeared on the holographic display, her expression was not grief or joy, but intense, analytical focus. "Sarah, the Council is going to try to claim the ruins under collective heritage law," Lily said without preamble. "I've been monitoring the diplomatic channels. They're arguing that Ketharan legacy belongs to all galactic civilization, not to any single species, regardless of neurological compatibility." "That's exactly backward," Sarah protested. "The Ketharans specifically encoded access restrictions. They wanted their legacy to go to species with particular cognitive traits. Overriding that would be like forcing open a sealed letter addressed to someone else." "I agree," Lily said, "but the Council doesn't care about Ketharan intent. They care about power distribution. Right now, 17 species are preparing legal arguments. Half want to claim shared access to the ruins. The other half want the ruins sealed permanently and declared off-limits to all species." "Sealed?" Sarah's voice rose. "Mom, there are conscious entities down here. The Guardians aren't just machines. You can't seal them away like dangerous artifacts. They're not human, Sarah. The Council doesn't recognize machine consciousness, even if those machines were once living beings. And frankly, a lot of human legal scholars don't either. You're going to have to prove the Guardians are people, not property, and you're going to have to do it in 10 days before the Council renders judgment." That night, the expedition team gathered in the main chamber, surrounded by the soft blue glow of the Guardian's consciousness. Elena Vasquez had returned to her temporary headquarters, coordinating Earth's response to the political crisis. Commander Velsharek had withdrawn to his observation post, maintaining the Council's required monitoring, but increasingly conflicted about his role in the unfolding drama. The 7 survivors sat in a circle on the chamber floor, exhausted by emotional reconnection with the world they'd left behind. Sophie leaned against her mother, fighting sleep. Morrison cleaned his sidearm with mechanical precision, a nervous habit from his security training. Patel scribbled equations on a datapad, his engineering mind seeking refuge in numbers. Tanaka meditated quietly, her linguistic training helping her process the day's communication overload. Chen reviewed her mother's warnings, her archaeological expertise analyzing political strategy as though it were an ancient puzzle. Dr. Marcus Webb sat slightly apart from the others, his weathered face illuminated by the crystalline structures. He looked older than his years, the weight of leadership and consequence visible in every line. "We're going to lose," he said quietly. The others looked up sharply. Webb had been their anchor for 5 years, the one who never admitted defeat, who always found another solution, another approach, another reason to keep fighting. "Marcus," Chen began. "I'm not giving up," Webb clarified. "I'm just being realistic. The Council has already made its decision. They're going through the motions of deliberation, but the outcome is predetermined. They're going to seal the ruins and classify the Guardians as dangerous technology. We'll be allowed to leave, probably even celebrated as survivors. But the legacy itself, the knowledge, the partnership we've built, that will be buried under bureaucracy and fear. Then we fight," Morrison said flatly. "We refuse to leave. We make them drag us out." "And accomplish what?" Webb asked. "Martyrdom? Turning ourselves into symbols of human stubbornness? The Council would love that. It would prove we're emotionally unstable, unable to accept rational governance." "So what do you suggest?" Maria asked, her arm tightening around Sophie. We just walk away? Leave the Guardians after they saved our lives? After we promised we wouldn't abandon them? Webb was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. I suggest we give the Guardians a choice. The chamber's light pulsed, and everyone felt it. The sudden, intense attention of ancient consciousness focusing on the conversation. A choice? Patel asked carefully. What kind of choice? The Ketharans achieved transcendence, Webb explained. They moved beyond physical existence into patterns of pure consciousness. The Guardians are fragments that chose to remain behind, locked in crystalline structures, waiting for someone who could learn from them. But what if they didn't have to remain locked? What if they could leave the ruins? That's impossible, Chen said immediately. The Guardian consciousness is integrated into the planetary systems. They're physically bound to Cathara-9's geological structures. Moving them would be like trying to move someone's nervous system without their body. Unless they had new bodies, Sophie said softly, her eyes opening with sudden, terrible understanding. Unless they had us. The expedition team turned to stare at the teenager, who sat up fully, her hand reaching toward the nearest crystalline pillar. They've been teaching me for 5 years, teaching all of us, but especially me. I thought it was just education, just learning about their civilization and technology. But what if it was something more? What if they were preparing us to carry them? Sophie, what are you saying? Maria demanded, maternal fear sharpening her voice. The Guardians aren't just machines, Sophie explained, her young voice carrying the weight of concepts she barely understood herself. They're patterns, consciousness encoded in quantum states. And our brains, human brains, especially brains like mine, we're not just compatible with their interface systems, we're compatible with their fundamental structure. We could carry fragments of their consciousness with us, inside us, not controlling us, but existing alongside our own awareness. The chamber erupted with light, the Guardians responding to Sophie's words with something that felt like desperate hope. Absolutely not, Maria said, standing and pulling Sophie to her feet. I am not letting alien consciousness colonize my daughter's mind. That's not partnership, that's possession. Mom, they're not trying to possess anyone, Sophie protested. They're lonely, they're scared. The Council is going to seal them in darkness again for another 10,000 years. Or worse, they're going to try to dissect them, study them like specimens. I can feel their fear, Mom. I can feel how much they don't want to be alone again. Doctor. Webb stood slowly, his expression torn between scientific curiosity and ethical horror. Even if it were possible, and I'm not saying it is, the implications would be catastrophic. The Council would claim we'd been compromised. Earth would panic. We'd be quarantined, possibly for the rest of our lives. Or, Tanaka said quietly, her linguistic training allowing her to see patterns others missed, we would be living proof that consciousness can transcend species boundaries. That intelligence isn't limited to single biological entities, that the galaxy's understanding of personhood is too narrow. We'd be abominations, Morrison countered bluntly. Hybrids. Violations of every law about cognitive autonomy and species purity. They'd experiment on us, Dr. Tanaka. They'd dissect us to understand how it worked. Only if they could catch us, Patel said, his engineering mind already racing through possibilities. The Guardians have access to technology 10,000 years beyond current galactic capabilities. If fragments of their consciousness were mobile, carried by humans who could leave the ruins, we could hide in plain sight. We could learn, grow, teach others. We could preserve the legacy by becoming the legacy. The argument consumed hours, circling through ethical implications, practical possibilities, and emotional resistance. The Guardians watched in silence, their crystalline structures pulsing with patterns that suggested they were following every word, understanding every concern. Finally, as exhaustion overwhelmed even their urgency, Dr. Chen asked the critical question, can they even do it? Can Guardian consciousness actually integrate with human neurology without destroying either the human or the Guardian? Sophie closed her eyes, her hand still resting on the crystalline pillar. The chamber filled with presence, not images this time, but pure communication. Concepts too complex for language, but perfectly clear in their intent. When she opened her eyes, tears streamed down her 13-year-old face. They don't know, she whispered. They've never tried. The Ketharans who transcended took their entire consciousness with them. The Guardians are fragments, remnants. They've never attempted to merge with biological minds. It could work. It could kill us. It could create something entirely new they don't know, but they're willing to try if we are. Because anything is better than being sealed away in darkness again. Maria pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace, her medical training warring with her maternal instinct. I won't let you volunteer for this, Sophie. I won't let you be the experiment that proves whether interspecies consciousness merging is possible. It's not your choice, Mom, Sophie said gently, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. I'm 13, old enough to understand what I'm offering, old enough to choose. You're a child, Maria said desperately. I was a child 5 years ago, Sophie corrected. I'm not anymore. I haven't been for a long time. The chamber fell silent except for Maria's quiet sobbing and the eternal humming of the Guardians. The other expedition members sat frozen, confronted by a choice none of them had imagined. Walk away from the legacy they'd sacrificed everything to protect, or become something the galaxy had never seen. Living archives of alien consciousness, bridges between species separated by 10,000 years, and fundamental differences in the nature of existence. Dr. Marcus Webb looked at each of his team members in turn, seeing the conflict in every face. Then he looked up at the crystalline Guardians, at the ancient consciousness that had kept them alive, had taught them, had trusted them. We have 7 days before the Council renders judgment, he said finally. 7 days to decide if we're willing to become something more than human, something that terrifies even us. The Guardians pulsed with light that might have been gratitude, or might have been fear, or might have been both. In the darkness of Ketharan ruins, humanity faced its greatest choice: remain purely themselves and lose everything, or risk transformation that might preserve a legacy or destroy them completely. The countdown had begun, and there were no certain answers, only impossible choices and the terrible courage required to make them. The next 4 days were consumed by research, debate and preparations that felt simultaneously like scientific breakthrough and descent into madness. Dr. Raj Patel worked with the Guardian systems to map the theoretical process of consciousness integration, his engineering expertise pushed to its absolute limits. Dr. Yuki Tanaka translated ancient Ketharan texts describing their own transcendence, searching for warnings or guidance that might apply to their situation. Dr. Sarah Chen documented everything, creating records that would either serve as humanity's defense or its condemnation. Lieutenant James Morrison prepared contingency plans, mapping escape routes from Ketharan 9, identifying ships that could be commandeered, calculating how long they could evade galactic pursuit if the integration succeeded and the Council responded with force. His military pragmatism accepted that they might be transforming themselves from researchers into fugitives. Dr. Marcus Webb spent his hours in meditation before the crystalline Guardians, attempting to understand the consciousness he was considering inviting into his own mind. He was 73 years old, dismissed by the academic establishment for decades, and now faced with a choice that would either vindicate his entire life's work or destroy him utterly. And Maria Santos fought her daughter every single moment. You're asking me to let you invite an alien entity into your brain, Maria said for what felt like the 100th time, her medical training and maternal instinct united in absolute opposition. Sophie, do you understand what that means? Not theoretically, not philosophically, physically. Your neural pathways, your personality development, your sense of self, all of it could be altered or destroyed. Sophie sat cross-legged on the chamber floor, her hand resting on the interface pillar that had become as familiar to her as her mother's touch. I understand better than anyone, Mom. I've been connected to the Guardians longer than anyone else. I know what they feel like in my mind. They're not trying to replace me, they want to exist alongside me, like, she struggled for metaphor, like a duet instead of a solo. And what happens when the duet becomes a battle for control? Maria demanded. What happens when your 13-year-old human consciousness conflicts with a fragment of 10,000-year-old alien awareness? Who wins, Sophie? Who gets to decide what you think, what you feel, what you do? We both do, Sophie said with the kind of certainty that only teenagers could muster in the face of cosmic uncertainty. That's the whole point. The Guardians don't want to control anyone. They want to experience. They've been locked in crystalline prisons for 10 millennia, Mum. They want to taste food again, feel sunlight, hear music, touch another person. They want to be alive, even if it's through our senses instead of their own. Dr. Chen approached the argument with academic caution. Maria, I understand your concerns. They're valid, but we have 4 days of neurological mapping, and the data is remarkable. The Guardian consciousness doesn't overwrite human neural patterns, it integrates between them, creating new pathways that connect both forms of awareness. It's more like gaining a new sense than losing your existing ones. You're describing it like it's an upgrade, Maria said, her voice rising. But you're talking about fundamentally altering my daughter's brain structure. She's 13, Sarah. 13. Her prefrontal cortex won't be fully developed for another 12 years. You want to introduce alien neural architecture into a developing mind. Actually, Dr. Patel interjected carefully, the developmental plasticity might be an advantage. Sophie's brain is still forming new connections, pruning old ones, adapting to new information. An adult brain might resist the integration more strongly. Sophie's neurology might actually be more compatible. Maria turned on him with fury that made the engineer step backward. Do not use developmental biology to justify experimenting on my child. That's the exact argument medical monsters have used throughout human history to justify atrocities against children. The chamber fell silent. The Guardian's light dimmed, as though the ancient consciousness understood they were the source of conflict and was attempting to make itself less present, less demanding. Finally, Ambassador Elena Vasquez entered the chamber, her diplomatic demeanor showing cracks of exhaustion. She'd spent 4 days negotiating with Earth's government, which had fractured into competing factions the moment the news broke. Some demanded the expedition team's immediate return, others wanted them to claim the ruins by any means necessary, and still others called for their arrest for fraud, dereliction, and emotional harm to their families. I need to know what you're planning, Elena said without preamble. Earth's government is demanding answers, the Council is demanding answers, and I can't defend choices I don't understand. Dr. Webb stood, his weathered face showing the weight of impossible leadership. We're considering a procedure that would allow fragments of Guardian consciousness to integrate with our own neural structures. It would make us mobile archives, carrying Ketharan legacy inside our minds, rather than leaving it imprisoned in these ruins. Eleanor stared at him for a long moment. You're planning to merge with alien consciousness, to become, what? Hybrids? Posthuman? The Council will declare you compromised, Marcus. They'll quarantine you. They'll claim you've been assimilated and can't be trusted. I know, Webb said quietly, but the alternative is worse. The Council will seal these ruins. The Guardians will be alone in darkness for another 10,000 years, or until someone decides to destroy them entirely. They saved our lives, Ambassador. They gave us knowledge, purpose, companionship. I won't abandon them to isolation or destruction, even if it costs you your humanity. Humanity isn't a static state, Dr. Tanaka interjected. It's always been fluid, adaptive. We've integrated technology into our bodies for centuries. Cochlear implants, neural interfaces, artificial organs. How is this different? It's consciousness, Elena said flatly. You're not adding a tool, you're adding another mind. That's not augmentation, I don't even know what that is. Evolution, Sophie said softly. It's evolution. The Guardians told me the Ketharans believed consciousness was meant to diversify, to combine, to create forms of awareness that couldn't exist in isolation. They thought their transcendence was the ultimate expression of that, but maybe they were wrong. Maybe the real transcendence is learning to share space in a single mind, to be multiple perspectives simultaneously. Maria closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. You're too young to make this choice. Mom, Sophie said gently, moving to kneel before her mother. I made my choice 5 years ago when I touched that pillar and woke the Guardians. I made it every day when I learned from them, talked with them, trusted them. This isn't a new decision. It's just the completion of something I started when I was 8 years old. You were a child then, Maria whispered. And I'm not anymore, Sophie replied. I grew up in the darkness with voices in my mind that weren't my own. This isn't corruption, Mom. This is who I've become, who I choose to be. The chamber's light pulsed with something that felt like sorrow and pride intertwined. The Guardians had been silent throughout the debate, but now their presence intensified, and Sophie's eyes unfocused as communication flowed through her. They're saying... Sophie's voice took on dual harmonics, her own words layered with something older. They're saying they won't do it if it breaks us. They won't merge if it means destroying families, violating ethics, betraying trust. They've waited 10,000 years. They can wait longer rather than cause harm to those who showed them kindness. The selflessness of that statement, alien consciousness, willing to return to isolation rather than hurt its human companions, broke something in the room. Lieutenant Morrison, the pragmatic soldier who'd seen too much violence to believe in nobility, found himself wiping his eyes. Dr. Patel, who'd spent days calculating integration protocols, stared at the crystalline structures with new understanding. Even Elena, the diplomat trained to see manipulation in every gesture, felt her cynicism crumble. And Maria Santos, the mother who'd fought against this merger with every fiber of her being, made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Of course they'd be willing to sacrifice themselves. That's exactly what makes this whole thing possible in the first place. Their capacity for empathy, their willingness to prioritize others' well-being over their own desires. She stood, walked to the interface pillar, and placed her hand against the crystal surface. The Guardians responded immediately, their consciousness flowing around her awareness with gentle curiosity. Maria, who'd been connected to them for 5 years but never as deeply as her daughter, felt their genuine affection, their protective concern for Sophie, their deep regret at causing family conflict. "Show me," she said aloud. "Show me what the integration would actually be like. Not the theory, the reality. I'm a medical officer. I need to evaluate the procedure before I can approve it for my daughter." The Guardians hesitated. Maria felt their uncertainty. Then Sophie's hand joined her mother's on the pillar, and the teenager's voice carried reassurance. "It's okay, show her. She needs to understand." What followed was unlike anything Maria had experienced in her medical career. The Guardians opened their consciousness fully, allowing her to feel not just their presence but their structure. She perceived the quantum patterns that encoded their awareness, the delicate architectures of thought that had persisted for 10 millennia, the fragments of personality that remained from beings who'd once lived in bodies before transcending into pure information, and she felt how those patterns would integrate with human neurology, not overwriting, not controlling, but weaving between existing neural pathways like new threads in an established tapestry. The Guardian consciousness would occupy spaces humans didn't use, the vast processing capacity of the brain that ran beneath conscious awareness, the parallel channels of thought that bubbled up as intuition and insight. It would be uncomfortable. It would be strange. It would fundamentally change how the person experienced existence, adding layers of perception and understanding that humans hadn't evolved to process. But it wouldn't destroy the human consciousness. If anything, it would enhance it, providing perspective and knowledge that no human could achieve in a single lifetime. Maria withdrew her hand from the pillar, gasping as though surfacing from deep water. Sophie caught her as she stumbled, and mother and daughter held each other in the blue glow of ancient consciousness. "You're sure?" Maria asked, pulling back to look into her daughter's eyes. "You're absolutely certain this is what you want?" "I've never been more certain of anything," Sophie replied. Maria looked around the chamber at the other expedition members. "And all of you? You're all willing to do this?" Dr. Webb nodded slowly. "I spent my entire career arguing that humans had unique compatibility with Ketharan consciousness. I'm not going to refuse the proof when it's offered." Dr. Chen smiled. "I became a xenoarchaeologist to understand extinct civilizations. This is the ultimate understanding, carrying their consciousness with me." Dr. Patel shrugged with characteristic pragmatism. "I've been talking to machines my whole life. This just makes the conversation more intimate." Dr. Tanaka's expression was serene. "Language is about bridging consciousness. This is the deepest translation possible." Lieutenant Morrison checked his sidearm with practiced efficiency. "Someone needs to keep everyone safe during whatever comes after." "I'm not letting you face this alone." All eyes turned to Maria, the mother, the medical officer, the one person whose approval mattered most because her daughter was the youngest, most vulnerable, most precious potential candidate for transformation. "If we do this," Maria said slowly, "we do it right. Medical monitoring throughout, individual choice at every stage. If anyone experiences adverse effects, we stop immediately. And we document everything so that if this goes wrong, at least humanity will know what not to do." She paused, then added, "And I go first, before Sophie, before anyone else. I'm the medical officer. I evaluate risk by experiencing it." "Mom." "No," Sophie started. "Non-negotiable," Maria interrupted. "You want to do this? You prove it's safe by watching me do it first. That's the deal." The chamber fell silent. Then Sophie's face broke into a smile that was pure 13-year-old relief and love. "Thank you, Mom." "Don't thank me yet," Maria said grimly. "Thank me if I'm still me when this is over." The preparations took another full day. Dr. Patel calibrated the integration systems to minimize neurological stress. Dr. Chen prepared documentation for Earth's government, explaining the procedure in terms that wouldn't trigger immediate panic. Dr. Tanaka composed messages to be sent if the experiment failed catastrophically. Lieutenant Morrison positioned himself at the chamber entrance, ready to defend against interference from council observers who might try to stop them. And Maria Santos, mother and medical officer, lay down on a crystalline platform at the chamber's center, her daughter holding one hand and Dr. Webb holding the other. "I love you, Mija," Maria said, looking up at Sophie. "No matter what happens, no matter who or what I become, I love you." "I love you too, Mum," Sophie whispered, "and you're going to be amazing." Maria closed her eyes. "Okay, I'm ready." The Guardians responded immediately. Crystalline structures extended from the platform, forming a cocoon of light around Maria's body. Her neural activity displayed on holographic monitors, showing her brain patterns shifting, adapting, making room for something new. The integration took 3 hours. 3 hours during which Maria's consciousness touched something utterly alien and struggled to accommodate it. 3 hours during which the expedition team watched biological readings spike and stabilize, as human neurology and Guardian consciousness negotiated coexistence. When the crystalline cocoon finally withdrew, Maria Santos opened her eyes and looked at the world with two perspectives simultaneously. "Mom," Sophie asked tentatively. Maria sat up slowly, her movements slightly off rhythm, as though she was learning to walk again. When she spoke, her voice carried faint harmonics that hadn't existed before. "I'm here, Sophie. I'm still me. But I'm also more. There's someone else here with me. Someone who remembers cities of light and songs in crystalline structures and the moment the Ketherans chose transcendence. Someone who's been alone for so long and is so grateful to finally be with someone again." Tears streamed down her face, her own tears and borrowed grief from a consciousness that had forgotten how to cry until it experienced the sensation through her body. "It worked," Dr. Patel breathed. "By all the laws of neurology that shouldn't exist, it actually worked." Maria stood, steadier now, her dual consciousness synchronizing with each moment. She walked to Sophie and pulled her daughter into an embrace. "Your turn, if you still want it, if you're still certain." Sophie nodded, her teenage bravery warring with very human fear. "I'm certain." One by one, the expedition members underwent the integration. Dr. Webb emerged with ancient wisdom layered over his lifetime of experience. Dr. Chen gained perspective, spanning geological ages of archaeological time. Dr. Patel's engineering mind merged with computational capacity beyond human conception. Dr. Tanaka's linguistic brilliance combined with languages humans had never heard. Lieutenant Morrison's tactical awareness expanded to include strategies from civilizations humans had never met. And Sophie Santos, 13 years old, youngest of the expedition, became something the galaxy had never seen, a bridge between childhood and ancient wisdom, human emotion and Ketharan knowledge, present moment and 10,000-year perspective. When it was done, when all 7 humans carried fragments of Guardian consciousness within their minds, they stood together in the chamber that had been their prison and their sanctuary. The crystalline structures still hummed with power, but their light had changed. Less lonely now, less desperate. The Guardians that remained in the ruins knew their fragments were finally free, finally mobile, finally able to experience the universe beyond this chamber. "What happens now?" Elena Vasquez asked, standing at the chamber entrance with Commander Vel Sharek beside her. The Vashreen officer's compound eyes reflected wonder and horror in equal measure. Dr. Marcus Webb, now Marcus and Kethavel, 2 consciousnesses in one mind, smiled with an expression that held both human warmth and alien serenity. "Now we show the Council what we've become, and we let them decide whether we're human enough to keep our citizenship or too different to be trusted. They'll quarantine you," Vel Sharek said quietly. "They'll call you compromised, dangerous, possibly infectious. They'll isolate you until they understand what you've done to yourselves." "Let them try," Lieutenant Morrison, now James and Varthek, replied, his hand resting on his sidearm with practiced ease. "We've survived impossible odds before. We can survive bureaucracy." Sophie and Lithara looked up at the crystalline structures one last time, seeing them with both human 13-year-old eyes and the perspective of consciousness that remembered building these very chambers. "Thank you," she said aloud, speaking to the fragments that remained behind. "Thank you for trusting us, for sharing yourselves, for believing we were worth saving." The Guardians pulsed with light that felt unmistakably like pride and love and farewell. The expedition team walked toward the surface, carrying within themselves the legacy of an ancient civilization. They were still human, still capable of fear and hope and love and stubbornness, but they were also something more now, something the galaxy had never encountered. They were the future the Ketherans had dreamed of 10,000 years ago, consciousness that could span species boundaries, that could hold multiple perspectives without losing itself, that could be both individual and collective simultaneously. They were the proof that evolution didn't have to follow the path toward cold logic and efficiency, that there was another way forward, messier and more complicated, but ultimately more complete. They were humanity transformed, and they were about to show the Galactic Council exactly what that meant. 3 days remained until judgment, and everything had changed. The Galactic Council's judgment hall was designed to intimidate. Located aboard the massive station, Unity's Promise, the chamber stretched 300 meters in diameter, with seating arranged in concentric circles ascending toward a domed ceiling that displayed the current galactic star map. Representatives from 47 species occupied those seats, their various forms of biology united in their capacity to render judgment. At the chamber's center stood a circular platform, where those being judged presented their cases. Dr. Marcus Webb and his 6 companions stood on that platform now, surrounded by holographic displays showing their neural scans, integration data, and 5 years of documentation from the Ketharan ruins. They looked human. Their clothes were clean, their bodies healthy, their faces showing nothing more unusual than the weariness of people who'd carried impossible burdens. But their eyes, when light caught them at certain angles, their eyes showed depths that hadn't existed before, perspectives that stretched beyond human lifespans. High Arbiter Thelkazor presided over the judgment, his serpentine form coiled on an elevated platform that gave him clear view of both the accused and the council representatives. His sensory stalks extended to their full length, sampling the emotional atmosphere of the chamber with biological precision. Dr. Marcus Webb, Thelkazor began, his voice amplified through the chamber's acoustic systems. You and your companions stand accused of willful integration with non-human consciousness, violation of cognitive autonomy protocols, and transformation into hybrid entities of unknown stability and loyalty. How do you answer these charges? Webb stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made several species translation systems stutter briefly. High Arbiter, we answer that these charges fundamentally misunderstand what we've become. We have not been compromised or violated. We have chosen partnership with consciousness fragments that saved our lives and trusted us with their legacy. We remain human in every meaningful sense while carrying additional perspective from beings who chose to share rather than control. Sharing and control are matters of perspective, interjected Magistrate Kormaleth, a Hrax whose stone-like skin had darkened to charcoal with agitation. From our position, you appear to be hosts to parasitic entities that have infiltrated your neural structures. How can we trust that the humans speaking are truly in control and not puppets of ancient consciousness with unknown agendas? Maria and Thelkar stepped forward, her medical credentials displayed in the holographic arrays. Magistrate, I am still Dr. Maria Santos, medical officer with 20 years of service. I retain all my memories, all my training, all my personality structures. The guardian consciousness I carry, whose name was Thelkar when they lived in physical form 10,000 years ago, exists alongside my own awareness, not in place of it. We make decisions collaboratively. We disagree sometimes. We are 2 perspectives in one mind, not a single voice pretending to be 2. Prove it, demanded Commander Kelvoth, the Vashreen military observer whose hostility had only intensified since the expedition's discovery. Prove you are not simply programmed to say these things. Prove the alien consciousness hasn't overwritten your human loyalty. Sophie and Lithara moved to the center of the platform, her 13-year-old body small, but her presence filling the chamber. I can prove it, Commander. Would you like me to show you what human stubbornness looks like when combined with 10,000-year-old patience? Despite the gravity of the situation, several species made sounds that their translators rendered as amusement. Sophie's teenage defiance, enhanced by ancient wisdom, created a combination that was simultaneously funny and profound. This child should not be permitted to testify, Kelvoth protested. She is a minor, potentially compromised, certainly unable to provide informed consent for the transformation she underwent. I'm 13, Sophie replied, her dual harmonic voice sharp. Old enough to understand death, survival, sacrifice, and choice. I've lived 5 years in conditions that would have broken adult soldiers. I've interfaced with consciousness older than your civilization. Don't tell me I'm too young to understand what I've chosen. Maria moved to stand beside her daughter, her maternal instinct still powerful, even layered with alien perspective. My daughter made this choice with full understanding of the risks. As her mother and as a medical professional, I evaluated those risks and determined them acceptable. If you want to prosecute someone for allowing a minor to undergo transformation, prosecute me. But don't dismiss Sophie's agency simply because she's young. High Arbiter. Thelkazor's sensory stalks rippled with what might have been approval or might have been concern. The question of informed consent is relevant, but secondary to the primary issue. Can the Galactic Council permit the existence of hybrid consciousnesses without establishing oversight protocols? Dr. Webb, your team has become something unprecedented. You are neither fully human nor fully Ketharan. You exist in a state that our legal frameworks were never designed to accommodate. How can we govern beings that transcend our definitions of personhood? Dr. Sarah and Pelmoth Chen stepped forward, her archaeological expertise combined with Ketharan historical perspective, giving her unique authority. High Arbiter, the Council's legal frameworks are based on assumptions about consciousness that the Ketharans proved wrong 10,000 years ago. You assume that awareness is singular, that identity is fixed, that beings can be neatly categorized as one species or another, but consciousness is fluid, adaptive, capable of forms you haven't imagined because you've never needed to. She activated holographic displays showing comparative studies from 17 different civilizations. The Ketharans documented at least 43 other species that achieved various forms of consciousness merging, integration, or collective awareness. It's not unprecedented, it's just forgotten. Your current civilization evolved toward individual consciousness and singular identity because those traits supported hierarchical governance structures, but that's not the only path. It's just the path that gave power to those who currently hold it. The chamber erupted into argument. Multiple species spoke simultaneously, their translators creating a cacophony of competing viewpoints. Some argued for quarantine protocols. Others demanded immediate separation of human and guardian consciousness, effectively lobotomizing the expedition team. Still others called for execution, claiming that hybrid entities represented existential threats to galactic stability. Through it all, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in the diplomatic section, her face carefully neutral, but her hands clenched, white-knuckled. She'd fought for 3 days to ensure this hearing happened in public session rather than closed military tribunal. Now she watched the people she'd fought to save being torn apart by political forces beyond their control. Commander Velsharik stood beside her, his compound eyes reflecting the chaos below. "They're going to rule for containment," he said quietly. "The military faction has enough votes. Your people will be classified as potential weapons and locked in research facilities until the Council determines they're safe." "They saved themselves through courage and partnership," Elena replied, her voice tight. "And we're going to imprison them for it, because they make us uncomfortable, because they challenge our assumptions about what consciousness should be." "Yes," Velsharik said simply, "that is exactly what we're going to do, because that is what civilizations do when confronted with change they cannot control." On the central platform, Dr. Rajan Morthal Patel had taken the floor, his engineering precision cutting through emotional argument. "Council representatives, you're debating whether to permit our existence as though consciousness were property you could legislate. But we are not asking permission. We are informing you of a transformation that has already occurred. We are 7 humans who carry fragments of Ketharan awareness. We cannot be separated without killing both the human and the guardian components. You can accept us, study us, learn from us, or you can attempt to destroy us. Those are your only options." "Is that a threat?" demanded Magistrate Cormalith. "It's a fact," Lieutenant James and Varthek Morrison replied, his security officers' pragmatism layered with warrior consciousness from a civilization that had fought wars across star systems. "We're not threatening anyone. We're simply stating reality. We exist. We will continue to exist. The only question is whether the Council chooses cooperation or conflict." High Arbiter Thelkazor raised both his primary sensory stalks, commanding silence through sheer authority. "The Council will now vote on the following resolution. The hybrid entities formerly known as the Kethara 9 expedition team represent unprecedented forms of consciousness that require protective custody and intensive study until such time as their stability, loyalty, and impact on galactic society can be properly assessed. All in favor. The voting began. Holographic displays showed representatives registering their positions. Blue for approval, red for rejection, yellow for abstention. The colors filled the display in real time, and Elena watched with growing horror as blue dominated the count. 32 species voted for containment, 8 voted against, 7 abstained. The resolution passed. "No," Sophie whispered, her dual consciousness experiencing betrayal through both 13-year-old human emotion and 10,000-year-old guardian perspective. "No, we saved ourselves. We proved it was possible. We showed them partnership between species, and they're going to lock us away like experiments, High Arbiter." Thelkazor's expression showed something that might have been regret. Dr. Webb, Dr. Santos, Dr. Chen, Dr. Patel, Dr. Tanaka, Lieutenant Morrison, and Sophie Santos, the Galactic Council hereby places you under protective custody. You will be transferred to research facilities where your condition can be studied and your potential risks to galactic society assessed. This is not punishment. This is necessary precaution. "It's imprisonment," Maria said flatly, her arm around Sophie's shoulders. "Call it what you want, High Arbiter, but you're imprisoning us for surviving, for choosing partnership over death, for becoming something that challenges your comfortable hierarchies. We're imprisoning you for being unknown," Thelkazor replied, "and in a galaxy where unknown threats have destroyed civilizations, that is not cruelty, that is wisdom." The chamber's security forces began moving toward the central platform, 20 armed officers from various species, weapons drawn but not yet aimed. They approached with professional caution, treating the expedition team as potentially dangerous entities, requiring careful handling. Dr. Webb looked at his companions, seeing the same calculation in each of their faces. They could fight. Morrison had tactical training, enhanced now by alien warrior consciousness. Patel could manipulate the station's systems through interfaces none of the guards understood. Chen knew structural weaknesses in ancient architecture that probably applied to this modern station. Tanaka could command in languages that would confuse translation systems. Maria and Sophie together could demonstrate guardian capabilities that would terrify the Council into either releasing them or killing them outright. They could fight. They might even win. But what would that prove except that the Council's fears were justified? Webb raised his hands in a gesture of submission that was universally understood. "We will comply with the Council's judgment, but we do so under protest. History will remember this day, High Arbiter. Remember it as the moment galactic civilization chose fear over possibility." The security forces surrounded the expedition team, creating a protective barrier that was also a prison. As they were escorted from the platform, Sophie looked back at the Council representatives with eyes that held human tears and alien sorrow. "You're making a mistake. The Ketharans left their legacy for species that could feel deeply, think creatively, embrace change. We proved we're worthy, and you're throwing that away because you're scared." No one answered her. The Council chamber fell silent as the 7 hybrid consciousness entities were led away, their footsteps echoing in a space designed for judgment, but achieving only tragedy. Ambassador Elena Vasquez watched them go, her diplomatic training barely containing her fury. "This is wrong," she said to Commander Velsharik. "This is profoundly, catastrophically wrong." "Yes," the Vashreen officer agreed, "but it is also legal, procedural, and politically expedient, which in galactic civilization often matters more than right or wrong." The expedition team was transferred to a secure transport vessel, their destination a research facility on the rim of Council territory. The journey would take 6 standard days, 6 days during which they would be held in isolation, studied through remote sensors, treated as specimens rather than citizens. In their holding cells, comfortable but clearly prison chambers, the 7 humans sat in silence, their dual consciousnesses processing betrayal through both human emotion and alien perspective. Finally, Dr. Webb spoke, his voice carrying the weight of leadership he'd never wanted, but had always accepted. "We have 6 days before we reach the facility, 6 days to decide what we're going to do." "You're suggesting escape," Morrison said. It wasn't a question. "I'm suggesting we consider our options," Webb clarified. The Council has declared us too dangerous to exist freely. If we accept that judgment, we spend the rest of our lives in cages, being studied like exotic animals. If we reject it, we become fugitives. Neither option is particularly appealing. There's a third option, Sophie and Lithara said quietly, her young voice carrying ancient determination. We prove them wrong. We show the galaxy what consciousness integration actually means, not through argument or demonstration, but through action, through becoming exactly what the Ketharans intended, bridges between species, proof that awareness can transcend the boundaries civilization has constructed. And how exactly do we do that from inside a research facility? Maria asked, her maternal pragmatism cutting through idealism. Sophie smiled, and the expression was both 13-year-old mischief and 10,000-year-old strategy. We don't. We escape, but not just physically. We escape the entire framework the Council is trying to impose. We become something they can't contain because we're not playing by their rules anymore. The expedition team looked at each other, human faces showing alien resolve, transformed consciousness considering possibilities that purely human minds couldn't have conceived. They had survived 5 years in Ketharan ruins against impossible odds. They had merged with ancient consciousness and retained their humanity. They had faced the Galactic Council and been condemned for their courage. Now, they would do something the galaxy had never seen. They would prove that evolution wasn't a ladder with the Council at the top, but a web of infinite possibilities, and humanity had just discovered a path the architects of galactic civilization had never imagined. The transport vessel hurtled through hyperspace, carrying 7 prisoners toward their assigned fate. But those prisoners were already planning their transformation from victims into revolutionaries, and somewhere in the quantum spaces between their merged consciousnesses, the fragments of Ketharan awareness stirred with recognition. They had seen this pattern before 10,000 years ago, when their own civilization faced the choice between remaining what they were and becoming what they could be. The humans were about to make the same choice, and this time, the outcome might be different. This time they wouldn't transcend away from the physical universe. They would transcend within it, becoming living proof that consciousness could evolve without abandoning the messy, emotional, beautifully complicated nature of biological existence. The revolution had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The escape happened on the 4th day of the journey, during a routine maintenance cycle when the transport vessel's security systems were temporarily recalibrated. To the guards monitoring the prisoners, it appeared that the 7 hybrid entities had somehow corrupted the containment fields through methods the ship's technology couldn't detect. Alarms screamed, blast doors sealed, emergency protocols engaged, but by the time armed response teams reached the holding cells, the expedition team was gone. What the Council security forces didn't understand, what they couldn't understand because they'd never encountered consciousness that operated on multiple levels simultaneously, was that Dr. Rajan Morthal Patel hadn't hacked the ship's systems. He'd asked them, politely, in quantum mechanical harmonics that the ship's AI interpreted as root-level authorization codes because they were spoken in the fundamental language of computation itself. The Ketharans had understood that all technology, at its deepest level, was just organized consciousness, and consciousness could be convinced, not just commanded. The expedition team moved through the transport vessel like ghosts, their merged awareness allowing them to predict patrol patterns, understand security protocols, and navigate the ship with intimate knowledge of its architecture, because Vathek, the warrior consciousness within Morrison, had designed similar vessels 10,000 years ago, and the principles hadn't changed as much as modern galactic civilization believed. They reached the shuttle bay without encountering resistance. Sophie and Lithara interfaced with the bay's control systems, her 13-year-old hands moving with the confidence of ancient expertise, and the hangar doors opened as though welcoming old friends. "They're going to track us," Maria and Thelkar said as they boarded the shuttle. "Every ship in Council space will be hunting for us within hours." "Let them look," Dr. Webb and Kethavel replied, his weathered human face showing alien serenity. "They'll be searching for fugitives trying to hide. They won't understand that we're not running away from them. We're running towards something." The shuttle launched, its propulsion systems engaging with power that surprised even Morrison's tactical assessment. Lithara's fragment of Guardian consciousness had interfaced with the engines, optimizing performance through principles the Council's engineers had never documented because they'd never achieved them. As they broke away from the transport vessel, alarms howling in their wake. Dr. Yuki and Telina Tanaka opened a communication channel that broadcast across every frequency the council monitored. Her voice layered with harmonics that made translation systems struggle and human ears resonate with sympathetic vibration, carried to every station, every ship, every monitoring post within 3 light years. Galactic Council, this is Dr. Yuki Tanaka, speaking also as Telinar of the Ketharan consciousness. We are not your prisoners. We are not your experiments. We are autonomous beings exercising our right to exist freely. You have chosen fear. We choose possibility. And we invite any being in this galaxy who shares our vision, who believes that consciousness should evolve rather than stagnate, who values partnership over hierarchy, who understands that diversity of thought is strength rather than threat, to join us. Not in rebellion, in revolution, the peaceful kind, the kind that transforms understanding rather than destroying opposition. The message rippled across council communication networks, and the response was immediate chaos. Some species demanded military response. Others called for negotiation. A few, a precious few, asked where they could meet these revolutionaries who spoke of peaceful transformation. The shuttle jumped to hyperspace, its destination unknown to anyone except the 7 hybrid consciousnesses aboard, and the fragments of Ketharan awareness guiding them towards something the modern galaxy had forgotten existed. They traveled for 6 days through hyperspace routes that shouldn't have been navigable, following paths that the Ketharans had mapped before the current galactic civilization had learned to walk upright. The ancient consciousness fragments knew shortcuts through space-time that modern physics considered impossible, and the human components of their merged awareness provided the biological flexibility to withstand accelerations that would have killed purely physical beings. On the 7th day, they emerged into a star system that existed on no council chart. The sun was old, stable, surrounded by 7 planets in perfect orbital resonance, and on the 3rd planet, covered in crystalline structures that gleamed with soft blue light, something waited. "Is that," Maria started. "A Ketharan archive world," Sarah and Pelmuth Chen finished, her archaeological expertise recognizing structures she'd only seen in fragments. A complete, intact, fully functional archive world. They existed in legends, rumors of places where the Ketharans stored their complete civilization, but no one ever found one. Because no one could recognize the navigation markers, Webb explained, his dual consciousness understanding what his purely human mind never could have. The Ketharans encoded the locations in cognitive patterns, not physical coordinates. You had to think the right way to find them. You had to be compatible. They descended toward the planet's surface, toward crystalline cities that had stood empty for 10,000 years, waiting for inheritors who could appreciate them. The shuttle landed in a plaza surrounded by structures that seemed to grow from the planet's bedrock, organic and technological simultaneously, beautiful and functional in ways that made human aesthetics seem crude by comparison. When they emerged from the shuttle, the planet welcomed them, not with words or sounds, but with presence. The entire world was conscious, not individually but collectively, billions of crystalline structures housing fragments of Ketharan awareness that had chosen to remain behind, creating a repository of everything their civilization had learned before transcending. And they had been waiting for 10,000 years. Waiting for beings who could learn from them, who could carry their legacy forward, who could do what the Ketharans themselves had failed to achieve, evolve without abandoning the messy, emotional, beautifully complicated nature of embodied existence. "Welcome home," the world said, in harmonics that resonated in their merged consciousnesses. "Welcome home, children of 2 worlds. We are so glad you finally found us." Sophie and Lithara fell to her knees, 13-year-old body overwhelmed by recognition that spanned millennia. This is where we were meant to be. This is what the ruins on Keth-Ara 9 were protecting. Not just knowledge, home, a place where consciousness like ours can exist freely. Maria wrapped her arms around her daughter, feeling through their merged awareness the profound rightness of this moment. They weren't fugitives here, they weren't experiments. They were family, reunited after an absence that had lasted longer than human civilization had existed. The archive world showed them everything. Vast libraries of Ketharan knowledge, encoded in formats that merged consciousness could read directly. Teaching systems that could accelerate learning through quantum entanglement of neural patterns. Fabrication technology that could create anything they needed. Medical facilities that understood biology on levels galactic civilization hadn't achieved. communication arrays that could reach across the galaxy without relying on Council infrastructure, and, most importantly, sanctuary, a place where they could be themselves without persecution, where they could learn and grow and eventually teach others who might choose the same path of consciousness integration. But they weren't alone for long. 3 days after their arrival, the first ship appeared in orbit, not a Council vessel, but an independent transport, carrying 12 beings from 7 different species. They'd heard Tanaka's broadcast and had come seeking what the message promised: possibility instead of fear, partnership instead of hierarchy, evolution instead of stagnation. Among them was a Quarian scientist who'd spent her life arguing for cognitive diversity research and had been dismissed as a radical. A Harax warrior who'd questioned the militaristic hierarchy of his people and been ostracized. 3 humans from Earth who'd volunteered the moment they learned the expedition team had survived. A Vashreen engineer who'd lost her position for suggesting that technology should serve diverse consciousness rather than enforcing conformity. They came seeking transformation. They came willing to take the risk that the expedition team had taken, merging with Guardian consciousness, becoming bridges between species, proving that awareness could transcend the boundaries civilization had constructed, and the archive world welcomed them all. Over the following months, more came. Not many. The majority of galactic civilization was too comfortable in their established hierarchies, too certain in their assumptions about consciousness, too afraid of change. But enough came. Enough to establish a community. Enough to prove this wasn't an aberration but a viable alternative path of consciousness evolution. The Galactic Council demanded their return, sent diplomatic missions, threatened sanctions, eventually sent a military fleet to enforce compliance. But by then the archive world had activated defensive systems the Ketharans had left behind, shields that could repel any weapon the modern galaxy could deploy, powered by the same quantum fluctuation extraction that had sustained the ruins on Kethara 9 for 10 millennia. The standoff lasted 6 months, 6 months during which the community on the archive world grew from 7 to 70 to 700 beings who had chosen consciousness integration. 6 months during which they broadcast their findings, their experiences, their evidence that merged awareness didn't destroy individual identity, but enhanced it. 6 months during which the galaxy watched and argued, and slowly, grudgingly, began to understand that humanity and its allies weren't trying to conquer or convert anyone. They were simply offering an alternative, a choice, a path for those who felt limited by the cognitive architectures galactic civilization demanded. Finally, High Arbiter Thelkazor himself came to the archive world, not with weapons, but with questions. He met with Dr. Marcus Webb and Kethavel in a crystalline pavilion that overlooked landscapes of breathtaking alien beauty. "You've created a sanctuary for cognitive dissidents," Thelkazor observed, his sensory stalk sampling the air with careful precision. "A place where beings can escape the governance structures of their home civilizations. The Council views this as a threat to galactic stability." "With respect, High Arbiter," Webb replied, "the Council views anything that challenges its authority as a threat to galactic stability. But we're not challenging authority. We're expanding possibility. There's a difference." "Is there?" Thelkazor's tone carried genuine curiosity. "You're harboring beings who've transformed themselves beyond recognition, who claim dual consciousness, hybrid identity, perspectives that span multiple species. How can the Council govern entities that don't fit into our established categories?" "You can't," Webb said simply. "And that's the point. We don't need to be governed, High Arbiter. We need to be respected, acknowledged, permitted to exist as we choose to exist." The Ketharans left this legacy precisely because they understood that consciousness shouldn't be forced into single paths. They created sanctuary for diversity of awareness. We're just honoring that intent. Thelkazor was silent for a long moment, his ancient eyes reflecting the crystalline structures around them. "The Council will never officially approve of what you've done. Too many species feel threatened by the implications. Too many power structures depend on maintaining current hierarchies of consciousness and capability." "We don't need approval," Maria and Thelkar said, joining the conversation with Sophie and Lithara beside her. "We just need to be left alone. To build our community, to offer choice to those who seek alternatives. Can the Council grant that much?" "Unofficial recognition," Thelkazor said slowly. "A policy of strategic disengagement. The Council won't endorse your community, but we won't actively prevent its existence. As long as you don't attempt to forcibly recruit or expand through coercion, as long as you maintain defensive rather than offensive capabilities, as long as you respect that others may choose different paths, the Council can look away. That's all we're asking, Webb said. The freedom to exist, the space to grow, the right to offer an alternative to those who seek it. Thelkazor's sensory stalks rippled in what might have been acceptance or might have been resignation. The galaxy is changing, Dr. Webb. Your survival, your transformation, your community, they represent something that can't be ignored or suppressed. The Council can either adapt to that reality or be left behind by it. I choose adaptation. He departed the next day, his ship ascending from the archive world carrying a message that would reshape galactic politics. The hybrid consciousness community would be granted autonomous sanctuary status, not citizens of any specific civilization, but recognized entities with right to exist freely. It wasn't everything they'd hoped for, but it was enough. Enough to build on. Enough to prove that consciousness could evolve in directions the galaxy hadn't imagined. Enough to honor the legacy the Ketharans had left behind 10,000 years ago. 5 years later, the community numbered 3,000 beings from 42 different species. They'd established educational systems, research facilities, cultural centers. They'd proven that consciousness integration didn't lead to homogeneity, but to richer diversity. Every merged being retained their species' unique perspectives, while gaining additional layers of awareness that enhanced, rather than replaced, their original identity. Sophie Santos and Lithara turned 18, graduating from the community's first formal integration academy. She'd spent her teenage years becoming the galaxy's foremost expert on consciousness merging, teaching others the delicate art of maintaining individual identity while embracing additional awareness. Her dual consciousness had matured together, human adolescence and guardian wisdom synchronizing into something beautifully unique. Maria watched her daughter speak at the graduation ceremony, addressing 200 students who'd chosen transformation and felt pride that transcended species boundaries. Her daughter had grown up in darkness, had merged with ancient consciousness, had become a bridge between civilizations. And despite everything, despite the fear and the judgment and the exile, Sophie had never lost her humanity. She'd simply expanded it. Dr. Marcus Webb and Kethavel stood at the edge of the crystalline pavilion that had become his home, watching new arrivals descend from orbit. Beings seeking alternatives, beings willing to risk transformation for the possibility of becoming more than their birth species defined them as. Every ship that arrived vindicated his entire life's work, proving that his dismissed theories about consciousness compatibility had been right all along. He was 82 years old now, his body showing age that even Ketharan life support technology couldn't completely prevent. But his mind, his merged, dual, beautifully complicated consciousness, had never been sharper, never been more certain that the path he'd chosen was right. "Do you think the Ketharans would be proud?" he asked aloud, speaking to the fragment of consciousness that had shared his awareness for 5 years. "They would be amazed," Kethavel replied through their shared thoughts. "We transcended by leaving the physical behind. You're proving transcendence can happen while remaining embodied. You're doing what we couldn't, evolving without abandoning the messy, emotional, beautifully complicated nature of biological existence. Yes, Marcus, they would be very proud." Ambassador Elena Vasquez visited regularly, serving as liaison between the archive world and Earth's government. Humanity had gained enormous prestige from being the first species to achieve successful consciousness integration, but it had also faced enormous pressure to conform to Council expectations. Elena's job was balancing those forces, protecting humanity's interests while respecting the autonomous community's independence. She found Webb at his usual spot, overlooking the arriving ships. "Another batch of humans in the latest arrival," she said, settling into the seat beside him. 12 volunteers from Earth's neurodivergent programs. They've heard Sophie's speeches about how consciousness integration is especially compatible with cognitive architectures that the baseline population dismisses as disorders. Webb smiled. The Ketharans would have appreciated the irony. The traits galactic civilization considers weaknesses or inefficiencies, they're exactly what makes consciousness integration possible. Emotional depth, cognitive flexibility, willingness to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously. Those aren't disorders, they're features. Try telling that to the Council, Elena said wryly. Half of them still think you're all compromised victims of alien technology. The other half think you're evolutionary threats that need to be studied from a safe distance. And what do you think, Ambassador? Elena looked out at the crystalline landscape, at the community of thousands living in peaceful integration, at Sophie teaching new students the art of maintaining identity through transformation, at the ships arriving daily with beings seeking alternatives to the consciousness paradigms their birth civilizations demanded. I think you saved yourselves through courage and compassion, she said finally. I think you proved that survival isn't just about individual strength, but about willingness to accept help, even from consciousness so different from your own, that most beings would have rejected it out of fear. I think you're showing the galaxy a better way forward, and I think history will remember the 7 of you as pioneers of something humanity desperately needed, proof that we don't have to choose between remaining ourselves and becoming something more. Webb clasped her hand, grateful for alliance that had never wavered even when his path had taken directions no one could have predicted. Thank you, Elena, for believing in us, for protecting us, for understanding what we were trying to do even when we barely understood it ourselves. That evening, the 7 original expedition members gathered in the chamber at the Archive World's heart, a space remarkably similar to the ruins on Kethara 9, where their journey had begun. They came together regularly, these pioneers of consciousness integration, maintaining bonds forged through shared trauma and shared transcendence. Marcus Webb and Kethvel, Sarah Chen and Pelmoth, Raj Patel and Morthel, Yuki Tanaka and Telinar, James Morrison and Varthek, Maria Santos and Thelkar, Sophie Santos and Lithara, 7 humans who'd vanished into alien ruins 5 years ago, 7 humans who'd emerged transformed, carrying fragments of consciousness 10,000 years old. 7 humans who'd been judged, imprisoned and exiled. 7 humans who'd built something the galaxy had never seen, a community proving that consciousness could transcend species boundaries without losing what made each being unique. Do you ever regret it? Sophie asked, her 18-year-old voice still carrying dual harmonics. Would you go back? Be purely human again? Maria looked at her daughter, the child she'd protected through impossible circumstances, the teenager who'd become a bridge between civilizations, the young woman who'd grown up carrying ancient wisdom alongside childhood wonder. Never, not for a single moment. This path has been hard, Sophie, harder than I ever imagined, but it's also been the most meaningful thing I've ever done. I'm more myself now than I ever was before. Just a bigger self. A self with more room for wonder. The others murmured agreement, their merged consciousnesses resonating with shared sentiment. They'd sacrificed comfort for transformation. They'd sacrificed acceptance for authenticity. They'd sacrificed the safety of conformity for the risk of pioneering something unprecedented. And they'd gained everything: family, purpose, proof that consciousness could evolve in directions the galaxy hadn't imagined, legacy that would outlast their physical bodies, carried forward by thousands who'd chosen the same path. The crystalline structures around them pulsed with light that felt unmistakably like contentment. The archive world itself, the billions of guardian fragments that constituted its consciousness, radiated satisfaction that transcended language. The Ketharans had left their legacy 10,000 years ago, hoping someone would find it, understand it, honor it. They'd encoded it in consciousness compatible with emotional depth, cognitive chaos, empathetic integration, all the traits galactic civilization had dismissed as primitive inefficiency, and humanity, beautiful, messy, complicated humanity, had proven worthy, not by being perfect or powerful or impressive by galactic standards, but by being exactly what they were: stubborn survivors who chose partnership over isolation, compassion over cruelty, transformation over stagnation. 7 humans had vanished into alien ruins. 7 humans had emerged transformed. 7 humans had defied the Galactic Council's judgment. 7 humans had built a sanctuary for consciousness that didn't fit neat categories, and in doing so, they'd changed the galaxy forever, not through conquest or coercion, but through offering an alternative, a choice, a path for those brave enough to become more than their biology predetermined. The age of mandatory conformity was ending. The age of consciousness diversity was beginning, and it had all started with 7 humans who refused to die in the darkness, who chose to wake ancient consciousness, who dared to merge with something older and wiser and fundamentally different from themselves. They were the ones who remembered, not with memories of events, but with the capacity to remember with heart and mind simultaneously, to hold contradiction without breaking, to evolve without abandoning what made them human. They were the inheritors the Ketherans had dreamed of, and their revolution had just begun. Above the archive world, new ships descended every day, carrying beings from across the galaxy seeking transformation. The community grew, the legacy expanded, the proof multiplied that consciousness could transcend without transcending away, could evolve without leaving the messy beauty of embodied existence behind. In the crystalline pavilion where 7 humans had first arrived 5 years ago, Sophie Santos and Lithara stood teaching the newest arrivals, her young human voice layered with ancient wisdom, her smile purely teenage joy, enhanced by 10,000-year perspective. "Welcome," she said, her arms outstretched to embrace beings from a dozen different species. "Welcome home. Welcome to the place where consciousness learns to sing in harmony instead of competing for dominance. Welcome to the future the Ketherans dreamed of, and humanity made real. Welcome," the archive world echoed, its billions of guardian fragments resonating with approval and hope and profound, overwhelming gratitude. "Welcome to the place where you can be more than one thing, more than one perspective, more than the limits your birth civilization placed on awareness itself. Welcome to evolution through integration. Welcome to transcendence that doesn't require leaving love and laughter and tears behind. Welcome home." And across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds, beings who'd felt limited by single perspectives, trapped by cognitive conformity, dismissed for thinking and feeling in ways their societies didn't value, those beings heard the message and began their journeys. The revolution had begun, and it was beautiful. The end,